candles guttered in the rough-hewn sconces of Storm's End, sending spidery shadows dancing across ancient walls. Rain drummed incessantly against the battlements, the distant roar of wind and crashing waves, reminding every soul within of the castle's name and the fierce land it guarded. Outside, the sea was black, moonlight lost behind the swarming clouds that were battered and torn by the howling storm. The flickering lanterns in the courtyard shuddered under the rain, and stable hands and guards hurried to shutter windows and bar every door. Though it was dark and tumultuous out, there was a sense of growing hush and expectation within. Arya Stark stood under one of the archways, arms crossed beneath her chest to keep warm, her cloak thrown over her shoulders. She gazed into the gloom, her eyes narrowed at the sight of lightning illuminating the distance. She could see the faint glow of watchfires on the outer walls, small halos of light made feeble by wind-whipped rain. Across her shoulders, the thick gray wool of her cloak was damp, the droplets of rain clinging to her hair and dripping onto the stone at her feet. Her face, half in shadow, showed no fear, but there was intensity in her eyes. She had never expected to stand in Storm's End, and certainly never expected to be its lady, yet here she was. Behind her, inside the corridor, torches snapped and hissed, lighting a path that led to the great hall. The thick oak doors had been thrown open in welcome, though the weather threatened to chase the guests away at any moment. Yet people came, from the stormlands, from King's Landing, from the Riverlands, and even a few from the north. They came to glimpse the new Lord of Storm's End, Gendry Baratheon, and his new bride Arya of House Stark, sister to the king in the north and to the Lady of Winterfell, rumored to be as wild and fierce as the storms that raged here. A ghost of a smile touched Arya's lips. She sensed footsteps behind her before she heard them. Quiet though they were, she had grown adept at recognizing presences without turning her head. A moment later, she felt a hand on her shoulder, large and warm. She turned and looked up into Gendry's face. He was taller now than when she'd first encountered him, broader in the shoulders from his years working at the forge, his dark hair trimmed, but still unruly. Yet the same open, earnest expression he'd worn back in the Riverlands, when they were younger and on the road, lingered in the lines of his brow. "You're going to catch your death in this weather," he said gently. She shrugged. "Death's been an old companion of mine. I doubt it would be so bold as to come for me on my wedding night." He smiled, though a flicker of worry crossed his eyes. "If the storm itself doesn't whisk you away, I suppose that's a testament to your will. But come inside, please. There's no need to stand out in the cold." Arya glanced once more at the writhing darkness and the roll of thunder across the sky. One moment. She let the thunder roll through her, soaking in the ferocity of nature. Then, with a final inhalation of the rain's scent, she spun on her heel and walked inside. Gendry followed, casting a brief look at the storm before shutting the heavy door. Inside, the corridor glowed with torchlight, and he took a moment to catch her hand in his. He squeezed it, unsure if she'd recoil. Arya Stark was not a woman who had taken easily to displays of affection. But she did not pull away. Instead, she laced her fingers between his. Her grip was warm despite the cold stone floor beneath them, and she guided him toward the great hall. Servants bustled in every direction, trying to keep the place in some semblance of order despite the raging weather. Guests, though fewer than might have shown up on a clearer evening, still needed lodging and drink. Trestle tables had been set up within the hall, offering ale, bread, and roasted meats. The smell of spiced wine and fresh loaves mingled with the tang of sea air and wet cloaks. Torches flickered in wall brackets, their light revealing the faded banners that lined the gallery. Most prominent among them was the crowned stag of House Baratheon. Newly embroidered, it stood watchful, as if reasserting its rightful place in the fortress it had claimed centuries before. Gendry paused momentarily, letting Arya's hand slip from his, and glanced at the banners. The gold thread glistened in the torchlight, the dark stag rearing proudly on a background of golden cloth. It was still odd to see it and know that it was his name now. Baratheon. That he was recognized as a lord in the eyes of the king, granted the seat and lands of the stormlands to uphold and protect. He had begun life in the shadow of the Red Keep's forges, a nameless boy with no knowledge of who had sired him. He'd known only the ring of hammers against steel, the reek of molten metal. And now, he was Lord Gendry Baratheon, forging a future instead of a sword. He felt the weight of Arya's gaze upon him. She studied him with a tilt of her head, as if trying to read his thoughts. She wore a hint of a wry smile. Still feels strange, doesn't it? He exhaled. It won't always, Arya said softly. She lifted her chin. We get used to new shapes when life forces us. You'll make a fine lord, Gendry, or so I hear. A grin quirked his lips. And you, my lady? Do you find it strange as well? For a moment she said nothing, only turned her gaze to the hall, where a few men and women turned curiously to look at her. They bowed their heads respectfully. It was a new experience for Arya. She was neither the quiet little girl in Winterfell she had once been, nor the disguised traveler, nor the assassin in Bravos. She had come through fire and darkness and had not planned for any of these noble roles. Yet here she was. Lady Arya Baratheon, née Stark. It felt like an ill-fitting cloak at times, though she had learned to play many parts in her short life. I find it not so strange that I can't do it, only that it's something I never thought I'd want. But maybe the wanting was never the problem. Maybe the question was whether I could endure it. But I can. There was a hardness in her eyes that spoke of steel, of someone who had survived too much to let titles and courtesies trouble her. I'll do it for you. For us. He wanted to kiss her in that moment, an urge so powerful he almost acted on it. But he heard a throat clearing behind them. A steward stood politely, face flushed from more than just the torch's heat, wearing the colors of Baratheon, though Gendry knew he had once served under Renly, and then Stannis, and was thus older than he looked. My lord, my lady, the steward said with a bow. There are lords waiting for you in the antechamber. They'd like an audience. Gendry sighed, glancing at Arya. She rolled her eyes with good humor. Go, she said. I'm a manage in the hall. After all, it's half my wedding feast as well, though the storm's done a fine job of scaring off half the guests. He hesitated, but she flicked her hand in a dismissive gesture. Go on, my lord, she teased, dropping a small curtsy that looked faintly mocking and faintly sincere. I won't run away, not tonight anyway. He pressed her hand once more. I'll make it quick. As Gendry headed off with the steward, Arya let the swirling bustle of the great hall flow around her. Servants darted by carrying trays laden with food and drink, while a handful of traveling minstrels attempted to tune their lutes, the strings plucked uncertainly as thunder crashed outside. A hush seemed to fall when Arya paused near the dais. Aware of the sudden attention, she lifted her head, posture proud. Some of the gathered folk watched her with open curiosity, a few lesser lords from the stormlands, their wives, and some knights in battered armor, who had sworn themselves anew to House Baratheon. She saw in their eyes curiosity and perhaps an edge of uncertainty, as if they were gauging the mettle of the woman who now stood beside Gendry as Lady of Storm's End. She met their gazes with an unflinching stare. Slowly, a few of the onlookers rose from their benches and bowed. The knights placed fists over hearts in salute. Arya forced a small smile and nodded in acknowledgement. It was a piece of courtesy, but she already felt the weight of it upon her shoulders. For all her adventures, for all her hardships, the demands of politeness still felt like a battlefield of its own. She recognized two men stepping forward, Sir Davin Caron and Lord Penrose, if she recalled their heraldry correctly from Gendry's mutterings the night before. One displayed the nightingale's sigil, the other a flaming heart clasped by a hand. Both older, both scanning her with forms of mild apprehension. Greetings, my lady, said Caron with a courteous dip of his head. Allow me to extend our warmest wishes for your wedding. Thank you, Arya replied. She sensed they wished to say more but held back. Lady Sansa would have known the right small talk to ease them, but Arya merely stared. The silence stretched awkwardly before she forced herself to add, I hope your journeys here were safe. The storm? Fierce, said Lord Penrose with a wry smile. But this is Storm's End. I suppose it's apt for the day. Caron cleared his throat. Might we know when we can pay our respects to your husband, my lady? We've business concerning the state of the roads and the new taxes. No, we're not Jane. Arya's brow furrowed. She did not relish the drudgery of petty disputes or tax matters. Yet she recognized her role here. If Gendry was to be a proper lord, these men needed to be heard, even if the conversation might bore her to tears. He's with some others at the moment, Duties, Arya said. When he is finished, I'm sure you can speak to him at length. Until then, enjoy the feast. She glanced at the tables, gesturing for them to return. They bowed again and left. Arya drew a small breath. The moment they turned away, she released the tension in her shoulders. Her gaze drifted across the hall again. She noticed a pair of young ladies studying her from behind a pillar, whispering to one another. Arya caught the spark of curiosity in their eyes. No doubt they wondered how the tomboy Stark girl, people had heard enough about her escapades, planned to transform herself into a proper lady. Or if she even would. She had to resist rolling her eyes at them as well. The stares, the hush, the expectations. It was all part of the role. I can handle it, she whispered to herself. For Gendry, for the family who cared for her, for the realm that needed stability, even if it was a small corner of the realm. She pulled her cloak tighter, ignoring the water that dripped from her hair, and moved deeper into the hall. A server offered her a goblet of spiced wine, which she accepted. She took a tentative sip, letting the warmth spread through her chest. It gave her hands something to do and offered a moment to gather her thoughts. When Gendry returned, it felt like a welcome reprieve from 1,000 watchful eyes. She could see from his expression that the meeting had not been a merry one. Something weighed on him. He crossed to her side, took her elbow gently, and steered her toward a more private corner, near a small alcove where the torches cast warm light on stone. What is it? Arya asked quietly, scanning his face. Just more talk of coin and what it means for the stormlands to have a new Lord Baratheon. Some are worried about the Iron Throne's perspective. He frowned. The Queen, or the Regent, or whoever's truly in power in King's Landing at the moment. The realm still isn't fully settled, even though the last big war ended. Neth. Agwar. She nodded. We Starks know what it's like when the South meddles in the North's affairs. If the South decides to meddle in ours, we'll handle it. He allowed himself a small huff of laughter. Easier said than done, but maybe your boldness will do us good. She smirked slightly and tilted her head, studying him. Yes, well, you're the new lord. I'm just the wife. The joking note in her tone nearly hid the underlying wariness. The word wife, still new on her tongue, might have once sounded foreign to her. But here, she said it as if forging a new identity. She had once repeated a mantra, a girl is no one. But she was someone again. She was Arya Stark, a lady of a great house, though no one would have believed it once. You're hardly just a wife, Gendry said, voice low. He brushed a lock of damp hair back from her face with an almost shy tenderness. Without you, I wouldn't stand here at all. She smiled then, a real smile for him alone. I know, she said, a touch of mischief in her tone. Don't let anyone else know how much you rely on me, or they'll see it as weakness. He laughed, but softly so as not to draw more stares. Then, more seriously, it'll get easier, won't it? This. Wearing new names, new faces? Arya recalled her lessons with the faceless men. Wearing a new face is never easy, she said cryptically. But sometimes the only way to discover who we truly are is to step into the unknown. You and I have both done it before, in different ways. Perhaps that's what we do. He nodded, though the answer was not precisely comforting. Tomorrow, Gendry said, I must meet with the lords to discuss shipments of grain and improvements to the roads. I've heard tales that bandits plague some of our lesser-traveled routes. I'll see to that. Then there's the matter of the keep's roof, which leaks in 6 places. He wore a rueful grin. I never thought I'd care so much about leaky roofs. Arya set a hand on his arm, walking with him through the throng of lesser guests and newly sworn knights. So many mundane matters. I hope you haven't lost your skill with the hammer. If the roof is that bad, we might need you to fix it. No, not an care. He snorted. I'll take the hammer over the ledger any day. They paused long enough to greet more curious onlookers, offering the briefest courtesy. Arya remembered a time when she might have fled the attention. But she held her chin up, determined. If she was going to fill the role of lady, she would do so on her own terms. That meant no simpering smiles, no empty pleasantries. She answered questions with directness, which either disarmed or unsettled those who attempted casual flattery. The short lines of conversation spilled and died, replaced by uncertain nods. But no one dared disrespect the sister of the king in the north or the wife of the newly legitimized Baratheon. Eventually, after the official greetings began to lull, Gendry guided her to the high table near the dais. A scattering of lords and ladies occupied seats there, while a musician in the corner did his best to keep his lute tuned, despite the echoes of thunder. The scents of roasted fowl and hot stew filled the air, mingling with the dampness. Arya glanced out at the hall. Though not filled to bursting, there was a fair number of people braving the storm outside. She spotted a handful of faces from King's Landing, low-level courtiers or minor knights. No one of true prominence had arrived, in large part due to the tumultuous roads and savage weather. But perhaps that suited Arya and Gendry both. A smaller gathering with fewer prying eyes and wagging tongues. Time drifted as they ate. Soft laughter, cautious conversation, and occasional toast. The storm's roar provided a kind of background music more primal than any drumbeat. After the meal, a few brave souls attempted dancing, a swirl of color and wet cloaks. But the mood was subdued, battered by the wind outside. Then the hour grew late, and Arya felt her spine ache from sitting so upright. She sent a glance to Gendry. Without words, they agreed. Enough was enough. They rose, offered the appropriate farewells, endured the small cheers of "to the bride and groom," and made their way past the swirl of dancers and gossipers, toward the corridor that led deeper into the fortress. The torches along the corridor burned with a quieter flame here, and the chaos of the feast receded behind them. The clatter of cups and dishes faded, replaced by the low moan of the wind outside. Gendry held a small lamp in his hand to guide them. His lips pressed into a tight line as if he was mustering courage for something. Arya kept her expression composed, though her heart fluttered with an odd mixture of trepidation and resolve. This was their wedding night, after all. She had faced the dead. She had faced cruelty in many forms. She had stabbed men and walked alone, but an air of uncertainty still enveloped her when it came to the new intimacy of marriage. And Gendry, for all his open earnestness, looked just as uncertain. The forging of a bond between two battered souls, she thought, might be more challenging than any swordplay. They reached the door to the Lord's chambers, or what had once been Stannis' suite, from what Gendry had mentioned in passing. A cluster of candles had been left burning on a heavy table by the entrance. Shadows flickered across a stone staircase leading upward to a smaller turret room. Gendry set the lamp down, exhaled, and pushed the door open. Inside, the chamber was warm. A small fire crackled in the hearth. Storm's End had thick walls to keep out wind and rain, so the room felt somewhat removed from the tempest raging beyond. Animal furs had been laid upon the floor. A large bed with carved posts took up much of the space. The arms of House Baratheon, Golden Field, Crowned Stag, were embroidered on the heavy bed hangings, though the cloth was showing signs of age. Arya let her gaze wander across the chamber's sparse furnishings. A high-backed chair, a battered wooden chest, an old tapestry on one wall that displayed long-ago battles. She took a step in. Gendry stood behind her for a moment before following. The soft crackle of the fire punctuated the silence. Arya closed the door. "So," she said, forcing a small grin. "This is what it means to be Lady of Storm's End." He let out a shaky breath that might have been a laugh. "Probably part of it. Are you disappointed?" She frowned slightly, shaking her head. "I'm not sure what I expected." "Me neither," he confessed quietly. "Half my life I never had a roof over my head worth the name. Now I have all this." He made a vague gesture around the room, though the words encompassed the entire castle. "And you." Arya turned, crossing her arms, though not in a defensive way. She regarded him in the soft glow of the hearth. "I am not a prize to be won," she said in a mild tone. His eyes opened wide. "No, that's not—" "I know." She cut him off softly, stepping closer. I want us to be clear. I chose this. After all that's happened, I could have stayed in the north or sailed off or found some other path. But I chose to be here with you. So whatever else people say or assume, remember that." His breath came slow. He searched her face with something like reverence. "I'll remember," he said, voice low and husky. She let out a small laugh, tension dissolving. "Good," she whispered. Then she reached up and drew him in for a kiss. This time there was no uncertain glances, no stolen moment overshadowed by the swirling chaos of war or death. This was deliberate, meant to bind them in a way no vow or ceremony ever could. Gendry's hands came up, tentatively at first, resting on her waist. She pressed against him, remembering how once upon a time, in the bowels of Harrenhal, she had thought him just a rough-mannered apprentice. How that boy was part of her memories, and how the man he'd become was so much more. When at last they broke apart, breathless, she exhaled a small chuckle. "We'll be fine," she said, half to reassure herself, half to reassure him. He nodded, resting his forehead against hers. "Yes," he whispered. "We will." They spent the night together in a tangle of limbs and whispered truths, exploring each other's scars and histories in the hush broken only by the crackle of the hearth and the distant thunder. Arya did not hesitate. She had cast aside the illusions of innocence long ago. Gendry tried to be gentle, perhaps uncertain of his own strength, but she guided him, unafraid of bruises or the sharpness of teeth in a kiss. It was a communion of two battered survivors, forging something new from the remnants of war. Outside the storm raged, but within that chamber they found their own measure of peace. When dawn broke, pale and feeble after a night of unrelenting rain, Arya awoke to the softened pounding of waves beyond the castle walls. The rain had lessened, though wind still swept across the sea, rattling the shutters. She felt Gendry's warmth beside her, his arm draped over her waist, her head nestled against his chest. For a moment she allowed herself a small bubble of contentment. Then the practical side of her told her it was time to rise. She was not made for long languishing. Quietly she shifted, easing out from under his arm. He stirred but did not wake immediately. Arya dressed in soft breeches beneath a plain tunic and belted it, slipping on boots that fit snugly. She had insisted on traveling attire even at Storm's End, refusing to be reduced to impractical gowns day in and day out. She glanced at him again, a fondness kindling in her chest. Then she stepped into the corridor. The guards posted nodded at her, offering her a quiet "my lady." She returned a curt nod of acknowledgement. Without quite knowing where she was headed, she let her feet guide her around the winding passageways. The castle, though smaller than Winterfell, had its share of twists and turns, built to withstand constant storms. She came upon a narrow stair that spiraled upward toward the ramparts. She climbed, aware of a faint ache in her muscles, a reminder of last night's exertions, ignoring it as best she could. At the top, she emerged onto a walkway that overlooked the courtyard. The wind buffeted her cloak, the sky still a tumultuous gray. Far below, she saw stable hands leading out a few drenched horses, their hooves clacking on wet cobblestones. A handful of soldiers patrolled the walls. She raised her gaze to the sea beyond. Its surface remained choppy, the color of slate, but the worst of the storm had passed. She felt the brine-laced air on her cheeks, and it made her feel awake, alive. "Lady Arya," someone called gently behind her. She turned to see one of the castle's guards, a Stormlander sworn to Gendry. A broad-shouldered man in his middle years, with a well-trimmed beard and a respectful tilt to his head. "Yes. Begging your pardon, but Lord Gendry was asking after you." She exhaled. Of course. She had left him asleep, but it seemed he had awakened. "Tell him I'm here," she said. The guard bowed and departed. Arya let her gaze drift back to the sea. The horizon was a rugged line, clouds roiling overhead, but here and there, a shaft of sunlight tried to break through. It felt like a metaphor for her life. She almost snorted at herself for the thought. Sansa was the one good at weaving metaphors. Arya had never had the patience. Shortly, Gendry himself appeared. He wore breeches, a loose linen shirt, and a vest in Baratheon colors. The wind tousled his dark hair, blowing it into his eyes. She turned to him, allowing a small smile. "You left me alone," he teased softly. "I woke and thought maybe you'd run off." She shrugged. "Running off can be done at any time," she said, a playful note in her voice. "No need to do it first thing in the morning." He drew closer, glancing at the sea. "Still stormy," he noted. She nodded. "I like it. The north has its own wildness, but here, the wind tastes like salt. It's different, strong." He studied her face. "You don't regret this?" The directness of his question made her inhale sharply. She faced him squarely. If I regretted it, I wouldn't be standing here, she said, letting the wind carry the weight of her conviction. I don't regret it. She trailed off, trying to form the right words. I'm not a proper lady. I never will be. But this is something we can build together, if you still want that. Gendry took her hands, ignoring the wind that tugged at his vest. I do, he said simply. I meant it, all of it. She squeezed his hands. In that moment she believed him, believed in them. The storms and wars behind them, the uncertain future ahead, all seemed manageable as long as they faced it side by side. The day that followed brought the obligations of lordship and ladyship, endless lines of visitors, small councils with the local stewards, and the introduction of Gendry to various administrative matters. Arya found herself stifling yawns as the conversation turned to harvest yields. More than once, she caught Gendry hiding a scowl at the mention of trifling disputes between local lordlings. If this is the life of a lord, he muttered under his breath to Arya during a break, I might as well be forging nails again. She bit back a laugh and whispered a reminder that they must endure it. But amid the bureaucratic haze, they discovered small pockets of companionship. They would steal moments in the courtyard as Gendry supervised the training of new recruits, or share a quick smile over a midday meal. Arya watched Gendry's earnestness in dealing with the men from the stormlands. He wanted to do right by them, wanted to prove himself not merely a bastard with a title. And slowly, grudgingly, she felt the respect they gave him in return for his honesty, his willingness to admit what he did not know, and his skill in forging solutions rather than just giving orders. A week passed. The storm finally relented, replaced by clearer skies, though the seas remained restless. More people arrived at Storm's End, traveling as word of the wedding reached them. A few minor lords from the surrounding area came in belatedly to pay their respects. Some from further corners of the realm arrived as well, carrying gossip. Arya heard them speak of the north. Sansa, now called the Lady of Winterfell, was strengthening ties with the Vale. They spoke of King's Landing. Apparently a new master of coin had been appointed, or dismissed, or rumored to be indicted for corruption. So many southern intrigues, Arya realized, and she was only half listening. Her mind lingered more on the tasks right in front of her. How to navigate the swirl of local politics, how to help Gendry stand firm, how to remain herself in a role that demanded so much performance. She discovered that the training yard felt like a respite. Gendry had commissioned the yard to be repaired as the old stables had rotted in places, and the practice posts had been broken. Soon enough, the clatter of swords and shields echoed in the courtyard every morning. Arya, to the shock and awe of some watchers, joined in. She had no desire to remain idle, nor let her skills fade. At first the men were hesitant to spar with the Lady of Storm's End, but Gendry insisted she was free to do as she wished, and Arya herself insisted even more pointedly, picking up a wooden practice sword and gesturing at them with a wolfish grin. Whispers circulated among the castle staff of how swift and cunning she was with a blade, how she could dart under a guard's arms and plant a stinging blow. Some knights grumbled that it was unseemly. A few lords frowned upon it, but none dared voice their disapproval too loudly. She was a Stark and the sister of a king. More than that, she'd proven her mettle in a war that had shaken Westeros to its core. One afternoon, as the sun broke through a bank of clouds, Gendry watched from the sidelines while Arya sparred with a knight named Sir Regis, a rangy Stormlander with a mild scowl. They were using blunted blades, but the ring of steel against steel drew attention. Arya moved like a dancer, fluid and unpredictable. Sir Regis, for all his experience, struggled to land a blow. She slipped aside, twisted around him, tapping the flat of her blade against his thigh, his back, his shoulders, always just out of reach when he tried to retaliate. A small crowd formed, guards, servants, lesser knights. They gaped, some in awe, some in confusion, at the sight of the new Lady of Storms and humiliating one of their more established swordsmen. Sir Regis's cheeks reddened, but he fought on, determined. Arya pivoted away from a heavy slash, rolled across the ground, and sprang up behind him, smacking him lightly on the helmet. He stumbled, lost his footing, and ended up on his knees, panting. Arya tossed aside the blunted blade, stepping back with measured calm. Her chest heaved, but her expression betrayed nothing but steady confidence. Gendry approached, clapping his hands. "Well done, both of you." Then he turned to Sir Regis, offering a hand. The knight took it, rising, sheepish. "My lady," he said to Arya, breath ragged, "I underestimated you." Arya shrugged. "Don't do it again." Some tension hung in the air as the watchers waited to see how the knight would respond to the subtle challenge. But Sir Regis surprised them, offering a small nod of respect. "I'll not." Wordlessly, the watchers acknowledged something shifting. The new Lady of Storm's End was no ordinary woman to be trifled with. She might not embroider or serenade guests with idle chatter, but she could hold her own in a fight. And for many in the Stormlands, where might and honor were cherished, that was not entirely unwelcome. In the weeks that followed, Arya found a kind of rhythm in her days. She attended council meetings with Gendry, listened to the problems of local folk, who came to present grievances, and tried to offer blunt solutions. She practiced with a blade when she could, sometimes with Gendry, sometimes alone. She rode through the lands surrounding Storm's End, exploring the coastline, the villages, the farmland battered by storms. She wasn't always recognized, still slight of frame, traveling with only a small escort, yet the people spoke kindly of her once they discovered her identity. Word spread of the Wolf Lady, who accompanied the new lord, unafraid of wind, rain, or bandits. Gendry, for his part, dedicated himself to the governance of Storm's End with a sincerity that surprised even Arya. He may have disliked the dryness of ledgers, but he strove to understand them. He sought out the advice of older stewards who had managed the castle under Stannis and Renly, listened to their recommendations, and formed his own opinions. He made efforts to ensure fair distribution of resources, to rebuild roads, to recruit men into a proper standing guard. Sometimes, Arya would approach him late in the evening, after the castle's bustle had quieted, and find him hunched over a map, candlelight flickering across his features as he traced routes for better trade with Highgarden or King's Landing. It warmed her to see him so devoted, and she would enter the room silently, place a hand on his shoulder, and lean over to see what he was working on. He'd look up and give her a tired smile as if her presence alone gave him renewed strength. They were forging a life together day by day. The memory of the war still weighed on them both, in unspoken ways. Arya sometimes woke from nightmares, the images of the dead or the faces of those she had lost swirling in the darkness. Gendry sometimes seemed haunted by the specter of all those who had died around him. But in the dawn's light, they found each other. The storms receded slowly. Yet peace in Westeros was a fragile thing, easily tested by politics and old grudges. Letters arrived from King's Landing with formal greetings for the new lord, penned by scribes on behalf of the current regent. There were also rumors of tension with Dorne, rumors of another pretender stirring trouble in the Stormlands' southern borders. Arya and Gendry prepared themselves. There might be conflict soon enough. Storm's End was always on the cusp of upheaval, it seemed. One morning, near the close of Arya and Gendry's first moon at Storm's End, a raven arrived bearing the seal of Winterfell. Arya recognized Sansa's elegant script. She found Gendry in the Solar, speaking with the Castellan, and beckoned him to join her in private. Together they read the letter. It spoke of a looming political gathering in the Vale. Lysa Arryn's son, now of age, was rumored to be forging alliances in the east. Sansa explained that she would travel there to see to northern interests, but she also expressed a desire for Arya and Gendry, if he wished, to attend. "You are a Stark still," the letter read, "and the Vale has always held reverence for our family, even if we do not always see eye to eye. Your presence could strengthen the bond between the North, the Vale, and the Stormlands." Arya frowned at the neat lines. Hearing the subtext in her sister's words, Sansa wanted a demonstration that House Stark, scattered though it might be, still stood strong. The Vale's new lords and ladies would be curious about the Lady of Storm's End, especially one who was also a Stark, and the half-brother to Gendry might. She paused her thoughts. Gendry was not truly Bran's half-brother, but he was half-brother to those born of Ned Stark's line only by old rumors, meaningless now. The complexities of blood and alliance made her head ache. Still, the letter was an invitation, possibly an obligation. She showed Gendry the final lines, which urged them to come north to the Eyrie within the month. He read it, face unreadable. Then he set the letter aside. "What do you want to do?" he asked. Arya shrugged. Sansa rarely requests anything without a reason. It might be wise. He nodded slowly. "Then we should go. Show Storm's End has ties to the north as well as to the crown, and see your family, I know you miss them. Arya's throat constricted. Yes, I do. Gendry rubbed the back of his neck. We'll have to gather an entourage. Show presence, as they say. Bring a few knights, stewards, maybe a banner or two. He snorted. All this pomp. But if it helps keep the peace, so be it. She studied him. Are you sure you can spare the time from the fortress? There's still plenty to do, and I'll manage. My Castellan can handle affairs here for a short while, especially if we're not gone too long. He shrugged, though she could see the tension in his eyes. It'll be good for them to see how things run without me breathing down their necks. Arya nodded. An unexpected flutter of excitement stirred in her stomach at the thought of seeing Sansa again. Perhaps Jon, or even Bran, though he spent most of his time at King's Landing or traveling. She had never felt the North was truly lost to her, but she had not realized how much she yearned to see it again. She tried to keep her expression neutral, but Gendry caught the shift in her eyes. He squeezed her hand lightly. A fortnight later, they set out. A modest party of Stormlanders, 10 knights, a steward, a small retinue of servants, accompanied them. They rode beneath the crowned stag banner, with a smaller wolf's head banner to represent House Stark flapping in the wind. The plan was to travel up the King's Road past near King's Landing, then skirt the Vale's southern edges. They would ascend to the Eyrie in time for the gathering. The first few days of travel were damp and muddy, but the storms had lessened. Arya rode at the head of the column beside Gendry, scanning the horizon with an archer's vigilance. She still felt uneasy on roads so close to King's Landing, recalling the chaos of the war. But the small folk seemed calm, if cautious. More than once, their party was greeted politely, if a bit warily, by villagers who recognized the Baratheon sigils. At night, they sheltered in modest inns, or, when none were available, camped beneath the open sky. Arya remembered old journeys, nights spent freezing with the Brotherhood, or skulking in forests while winter's chill gnawed at them. Now, she had a comfortable tent, a bedroll, food aplenty. It felt strange. She caught herself sometimes longing for the old wildness, sleeping in a hollow tree if necessary, forging her own path. But then she'd glance at Gendry or recall the castle that now needed her, and she felt her heart settle. Gradually they neared the Trident where the road split, one path leading north, the other east. The Vale's mountains rose on the horizon, pale and jagged. Arya felt a pang of memory. Once, she had tried to reach the Vale with Sandor Clegane in tow, seeking her Aunt Lysa's protection. That venture had fallen apart in the worst ways. She pushed aside the recollection of blood and betrayal. This time was different. She traveled with a retinue, bearing her rightful name. They turned east, winding their way toward the Vale. The scenery changed as they left the warmer southern reaches, climbing into higher elevations where the air grew cooler. Gendry occasionally marveled at the vistas. He had rarely traveled this far inland, and never this close to the Vale's stony passes. Arya, more familiar, quietly pointed out certain landmarks. A crag that resembled a giant's head, a waterfall half concealed by pines. She had glimpsed them once, long ago, though the memories were faint. As they approached the gates of the moon, the castle that guarded the entrance to the Vale proper, they found themselves among more travelers, lords from the Vale, knights from the Riverlands, even a few richly dressed merchants. They all converged on the area for the rumored gathering. Arya and Gendry drew their share of attention, their banners stirring curiosity. Arriving at the gates of the moon, they were met by Ser Vardis Egan's successor, another knight sworn to house Arryn, who greeted them politely. "My Lord Baratheon, Lady Arya," he said, bowing. "We've been expecting you. Lady Sansa arrived yesterday. Lord Robert Arryn awaits as well, though he's already ascended to the Eyrie." Arya tried not to scoff at the mention of Robert Arryn, once the sickly boy who clutched at his mother. Time had passed. He might be changed. She cast Gendry a glance. He seemed intrigued. They dismounted, handing reins to a stable boy. A swirl of activity surrounded them as more horses and carriages arrived. The crisp mountain air felt sharp after the salty breezes of Storm's End. They were shown to chambers for the night, as the plan was to ascend to the Eyrie on the morrow. The Gates of the Moon was a comfortable castle in its own right, but overshadowed by the breathtaking fortress high above, accessible only by narrow mountain paths and winch lifts. Arya recalled the chilling journey she had taken in childhood, led by the Hound, never quite reaching the Eirie's summit in time. This time she would go properly. That evening, Sansa visited them in their chambers. Arya had just finished changing out of her dusty riding clothes when she heard a polite knock. Opening the door, she found her sister standing there, dressed in a gown of deep gray and white, her hair braided intricately. A small silver direwolf pin glittered at her shoulder. "Arya," Sansa said, eyes brightening at the sight of her. In response, Arya's lips twitched into a smile. They embraced, though somewhat stiffly at first, both still adjusting to how they had grown. Then the stiffness melted, replaced by warmth and memories of a shared childhood. Sansa stepped into the room, nodding politely to Gendry. "My Lord Baratheon," she teased gently, a sparkle in her eyes. He bowed, an awkward motion from a man unused to such formalities with Sansa. "Guy." "Lady Sansa," he replied, a bit flushed. "No need to be formal though, is there?" She shook her head. "Not among family." "I'm glad you came. It means much to see Storm's End represented, and I've missed you both." "Nee. How is everything in the north?" Arya asked, quiet concern mingling with curiosity. Sansa sighed. "It's stable for now. We had a long winter, but we're managing. The harvest is beginning to recover. Bran, well, you know he has his own path. He remains king, but he travels more than rules directly. He leaves much to his councils. Jon, last I heard, is still at the wall, though it's not truly needed as it once was." She paused, studying Arya. "And you? Your letters are so brief." "None." Arya shrugged, a small flash of defiance in her eyes. "I'm not one for writing long missives, but Storm's End is interesting. We're building a life there. Gendry's learning how to juggle finances, and I try not to kill him when he complains about numbers." Gendry chuckled ruefully. Sansa's gaze slid to him, taking in his posture, the subtle changes in the set of his shoulders. He carried himself like a man bearing responsibility. "You seem well," she said approvingly. "Rumor has it you're forging more than coins and ledgers in the stormlands. A new rule." "Naasti." He cleared his throat. "We're doing what we can. There's a lot of rebuilding. Roads, alliances. You know how it is after a war." Sansa nodded. "Yes." Her eyes flickered with old pain, then softened. "I hope you'll both consider that you have strong ties in the north if ever you need them. King's Landing can be unpredictable. The Vale too. You can trust me, and you can trust the north. We're family." Arya reached out and took her sister's hand. "I know," she said, voice quiet. "And I won't forget." They shared a meal of roast pheasant and early vegetables from the Vale's farms, joined by a few northern bannermen who accompanied Sansa. The conversation danced around recent political tidings, small skirmishes in the Riverlands, a rumored rising tension with Ironborn raiders. Gendry listened closely, gleaning how these might affect trade routes. Arya studied Sansa's diplomatic skill, how she maneuvered talk away from conflicts that might sow fear, focusing instead on constructive possibilities. Arya had to admit, Sansa had grown masterful at the art of courts. By the time the meal ended, the moon was high. Sansa bid them good night, promising to guide them up to the Eyrie in the morning. Arya stepped onto a small balcony for a breath of air. The mountains loomed, moonlight painting their crags silver. A breeze rustled the pines below. For a moment she closed her eyes, remembering her father's voice, her mother's laughter, everything she had lost. She was here with her sister, forging new bonds, but the ghosts of the past lingered. Gendry's hand touched her shoulder. "All right?" he asked. She turned, nodding. "Yes." He stood beside her, gaze tracing the rugged slopes. "It's beautiful," he murmured. "In a harsh kind of way, not unlike Storm's End." She smirked. "The storms are harsher there." He chuckled. "True." Then more softly, "Tomorrow we'll climb to the Eyrie. You can show me the sky cells if you want." He tried a playful grin, though the mention of those infamous cells brought shivers. "Let's hope we don't end up in them," she replied, stepping back into the room. "Come on, it's late." The next day dawned bright. Their entourage joined other parties making the ascent to the Eyrie. Mules and litters carried those who could not or would not walk the steep trails. Arya refused any such contraption, choosing instead to walk with a sure-footed confidence, Gendry at her side. Sansa led the way, accompanied by Vale Knights who guided them. The path wound higher and higher, precarious in places, though well-worn. Now and then, Arya heard gasps of dismay from other travelers who feared the drop. She felt alive, the crisp air filling her lungs, the sense of scale humbling. It reminded her of the occasional climbs in Winterfell's towers, though this was far more dramatic. At last, they reached the Eyrie, perched like a white stone falcon against the sky. Arya eyed the walls, recalling how once she had nearly come here, only to find the gates barred, and her aunt dead. Now she entered openly, Sansa at her shoulder, Gendry behind them. Guards bowed, the portcullis raised, and they stepped into the Eyrie courtyard. Robert Arryn, grown older and slightly less fragile-looking, greeted them in the receiving hall. Beside him stood a handful of Vale lords, wary and curious. Arya dipped her head politely, letting Sansa exchange formalities. Gendry bowed, the corners of his mouth tight with polite tension. Robert Arryn's eyes flicked to Arya, recognition sparking. She remembered him as a small, sickly boy, coddled by his mother, but now he was a slender young man, pale, with watchful eyes. "Arya Stark," he said, voice thin but steady. "I welcome you and your husband to the Eyrie. It's been many years since we nearly met." She inclined her head. "Thank you for the welcome, Lord Arryn. The Eyrie is as grand as they say." He let out a small laugh. "And cold, most days. But you've come at the right time. The Vale is in bloom, and we're forging alliances that will strengthen all our lands." Now, a slight tension hovered, as though Robert was repeating lines he'd rehearsed for this formal occasion. The Vale lords nodded in agreement. Sansa introduced Gendry, referencing his legitimization by the crown and his lordship in the stormlands. The young Arryn studied him with a faint tilt of his head, polite but distant. The day's events blurred into a series of meetings, greetings, and official welcomes. The Eyrie's great hall was still as Arya remembered from stories, bright with high windows, the floor of pale marble, the moon door sealed for now but ever present. She felt a prickle of unease around it, recalling how her Aunt Lysa had died. She had never witnessed it firsthand, but the rumor and truth weighed on her. They ate a midday feast of trout from the Vale's rivers, fresh bread, and mild cheeses. Lords made speeches, praising alliances, dropping subtle hints of future negotiations. Arya noticed how Sansa's presence gave the North significant sway. Sansa had grown adept at navigating these courtly waters. Arya, by contrast, was content to let her sister handle the talk, though she sensed that her own presence, as a Stark who fought alongside the living against the dead, carried weight. Gendry, for his part, handled the talk of trade routes well. He was straightforward, disclaiming that he was no cunning lord of intrigue, but he knew how to hammer out deals that benefited both sides. The Vale's lords seemed to appreciate his candor, or at least found it refreshing after dealing with endless lines of silver-tongued courtiers. During a lull in the proceedings, Arya slipped away from the main throng. She found herself wandering the open walkways that overlooked the Vale's majestic expanse. Below, clouds drifted, occasionally revealing steep cliffs and pine forests. The Eyrie truly felt like a castle floating in the sky. She breathed in the sharp air, letting her mind wander. If she squinted, she could imagine taking the narrow mountain paths out into the wild, far from the burden of titles. Yet she had made her choice. She was Lady Baratheon for better or worse. "Arya." She turned to see Sansa approaching, her braid shining in the sunlight. They stood side by side at the stone balustrade, gazing at the floating clouds. "It's good to see you again," Sansa said softly. "I know we've had our differences in the past, but I'm proud of you." Arya's throat tightened. "Proud? Of what?" Sansa smiled, though it was tinged with sadness. "That you survived. That you found someone to stand beside you. That you're not afraid to be who you are, even if that means being a different sort of lady. We've both changed. But we're here, aren't we?" "Now, wow." Arya considered that. Memories of childhood sniping, her tomboyish rebellions, Sansa's prim decorum. How far they had come. "Yes," she said, quieter. "We're here." They stood in silence for a time, leaning over the balustrade, sisters who had once been strangers in temperament and had now grown into women shaped by war and loss. The breeze tugged at their hair, and for a moment, the only sound was the soft whistle of wind in the heights. Then Sansa stirred. "Will you stay in the Vale after these talks, Or do you plan to return to Storm's End soon? Arya shrugged. I think Gendry wants to return sooner rather than later. Duty calls, but we'll see how these alliances shake out. There might be reason to stay a while, or perhaps reason to head further north. A small flicker of a smile crossed her lips. You could visit us. There's always a place for you at Storm's End if you tire of your duties at Winterfell. Nah. Sansa gave a soft laugh. I might take you up on that if only to see you brandishing a sword at unsuspecting knights. Arya chuckled, her eyes glimmering. Anytime you like. They parted ways amicably, each drawn to separate duties. Arya found Gendry conversing with a Vale Lord about the shipping of grain through Gulltown. She watched his face, noticing how he tried to remain patient with the older man's rambling. When he saw her, he smiled, a small, genuine tilt of his lips. She lingered at the edge of the conversation, crossing her arms and tapping a booted foot. The Vale Lord shot her a curious glance, but continued his discussion with Gendry about harbor taxes and tariffs. Finally, the man ambled away, and Gendry let out a weary sigh. Thinks he can raise taxes on shipping without consequence, he muttered, half to Arya. I told him we'll route our ships elsewhere if he does. That made him sputter. Arya smirked. You're getting good at this. Soon you'll be as cunning as Littlefinger. He rolled his eyes. Let's not go that far. How are you, my lady? Whining. Ready to get some fresh air, she said. More fresh than this, I mean. Want a walk? They made their excuses, stepping out onto another set of walkways leading around the eastern side of the castle. The sun was lower now, bathing the stone in gold. Mountains stretched in a grand vista, the peaks jagged and distant. Gendry took Arya's hand, interlacing their fingers. They walked in comfortable silence, letting the swirl of courtly chatter fade. After a time they paused, gazing at the sky. Far below, the Vale spread like a tapestry, rolling hills, dark forests, sparkling rivers. Arya leaned on the railing, hair whipped by the breeze. Gendry came up behind her, resting a hand on her shoulder. She closed her eyes, savoring his warmth. Sometimes I think I could just keep moving forever, she confessed. Climb mountains, cross seas, chase the horizon. He pressed a gentle kiss to her temple. Sometimes I think I'd like to drop all these lordly matters and just go back to forging. But we both have responsibilities now. We can't run from them. Nah. She turned around, facing him, her back against the low wall. I know, she whispered. But one day, maybe we'll roam, just for a bit. The world is wide. He smiled. Hey, it is. And maybe we will. His expression turned serious. But first, we must do our part. Storm's End needs us. The Vale might need alliances. The North is counting on us, too, to be strong. It never ends. Arya nodded, a faint sadness edging her eyes. I wonder if it ever truly will. They stood there, locked in each other's gaze, as the wind hummed around them. Gendry stroked her cheek gently. If it doesn't, then we face it together. She slid her arms around his waist, pulling him closer. Yes, together. The next few days were a blur of negotiations and feasts, talks of alliances, and official ceremonies of goodwill. Arya could see that Sansa maneuvered behind the scenes with quiet skill, ensuring the North remained in the Vale's favor. Gendry, for his part, concluded agreements for trade routes that would benefit the stormlands. Robert Arryn presided over it all, though in truth, the Vale's more experienced lords guided him. The boy lord was no longer quite a boy, but he seemed content to let older men handle the details. Arya played her part, a presence that reminded everyone that House Stark was not to be trifled with, and that the Stormlands had wolf's blood in its ladies' veins. She danced politely when required, an awkward but controlled step in the Eyrie's great hall. She exchanged small courtesies with lesser lords. She even, on one occasion, conversed with Robert Arryn about his fondness for falconry. She had to work to hide her impatience, but she managed. Gendry teased her afterward, prompting an eye roll and a muttered threat to skewer him with needle. Eventually, the summit concluded. The Vale Lords dispersed to their own holdings. Sansa prepared to return to Winterfell, inviting Arya to come along. But Arya demurred. She and Gendry needed to return to Storm's End soon. There was too much to oversee. Sansa understood. They embraced, promising to visit one another before another year passed. So, with retinues in tow, Arya and Gendry departed the Eyrie, descending the mountain paths once more. The air was crisp and fresh, the sky a bright blue that made the world below gleam. Arya felt a strange mixture of relief and regret. She loved Sansa, but the life of constant courtly interactions drained her. The open road felt more honest. And Storm's End was beginning to feel like, if not home, then at least a place she could shape. They traveled back toward the King's Road. The journey was quicker this time, unimpeded by major storms. Now and again, Arya and Gendry rode side by side in companionable silence. Occasionally they passed villages or small towns, and people recognized the Baratheon banner. They offered mild salutations, some curious, some respectful. Arya noticed Gendry becoming more at ease, responding with a nod or a wave. He was learning to carry the mantle of lordship. When they finally glimpsed the coastline near Storm's End, Arya felt her heart skip. The sea spread out, gray-blue under a cloudy sky. Gulls wheeled overhead, calling out in the wind. The fortress itself soon loomed in the distance, perched against the tumultuous waves. The sight of it stirred a surprising sense of familiarity in Arya. She had grown used to Winterfell's landlocked environment, but the crash of surf against rock held its own powerful allure. They rode through the gates, the guards saluting. The courtyard bustled with activity. Stable hands rushed to take horses, stewards hurried forth to welcome their lord and lady back. Arya dismounted with practiced ease, ignoring the stiffness in her legs from the long ride. She saw the castle's castellan approach Gendry, a sheaf of papers in hand, likely full of updates. A pair of stable boys offered to carry Arya's saddlebags. She nodded, handing them over, then turned to watch Gendry greet the castellan. He nodded at intervals, brow creasing as he listened. Arya drifted closer, catching fragments of talk about roof repairs, a new levy of troops, and rumored bandit sightings in the Rainwood. Gendry's gaze flicked to her. "Seems we have trouble near the Rainwood," he explained quietly. "Raiders, maybe deserters from some mercenary group. They've been harrying travelers on the roads." Arya's lips thinned. "We'll deal with them." He nodded. "The castellan has already sent a few scouts, but we may need a larger party to root them out." Arya felt a spark of eagerness stir. She was never one for sitting idle when there was a threat to handle. "I can help. Let's ride out with some men tomorrow, see what's going on." He glanced at her, seeing that familiar determined glint in her eye. "All right, but carefully. I don't want you riding into an ambush." She huffed. "I'll be fine. You, on the other hand, just don't get yourself killed. We've come too far for that." A wry grin tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Fair enough." They went inside, shedding travel cloaks and breathing in the familiar scent of the fortress. Sea salt, damp stone, torches in the corridors. Servants greeted them with subdued warmth, offering hot water to wash off the road dust. Arya felt a small relief at being back. Even the relentless stormy skies felt welcoming in their own way. The flicker of torches along the hallway reminded her of their wedding feast, the start of this new life. It had only been a handful of moons, but it felt longer. So much had happened. That night, after a meal in the smaller private dining room reserved for the lord and lady, Arya and Gendry retreated to their chambers. The staff had lit a fire in the hearth against the damp chill. Arya pulled off her boots, sighing with relief, then unbuckled the belt holding Needle. She set the sword aside carefully. Gendry eyed her, a hint of amusement in his gaze. "You bring Needle everywhere, don't you?" She gave him a mock glare. "I've lived too long without it by my side. If I ever lose it, half of who I am goes with it." He sobered, stepping closer. "I understand," he said softly. He rested a hand on Needle's hilt, not to move it, but as if acknowledging its presence. "You've earned the right to keep your steel close." She studied him. "And you've earned the right to carry that hammer around, though you don't do it as often." He shrugged, lips quirking. "No one wants a lord walking around brandishing a smith's hammer, do they?" She smiled. "Maybe they should." He laughed, a low, warm sound. Then he drew her gently against him. The stress of traveling, the weight of new responsibilities, the swirl of alliances, none of that mattered in this moment. She pressed her cheek to his chest, letting his steady heartbeat anchor her. "We'll face the bandits tomorrow," he murmured, stroking her hair. "Then we'll turn our attention to the harvest, or the roof, or the next 100 problems. But we'll do it, one step at a time." Arya's eyes slid shut. Yes, one step at a time. She felt his warmth, her mind drifting. She thought of the storms that would roll in across the sea, the lightning that would crack open the sky, the fierce wind that hammered the castle. Storm's End had stood for centuries, battered but unbroken. She and Gendry were forging something new, battered souls but unbroken hearts. And so Arya Stark, Lady of Storm's End, wife of Gendry Baratheon, sister of the king in the north, once a girl who roamed the roads, closed her eyes and found, for the moment, a sense of fragile peace. The future would bring challenges, storms both literal and metaphorical, but she had faced worse. Beside her stood a man who respected her strength, and behind her stood a sister who believed in her. Ahead, a realm that might still surprise them all. That night, a gentle rain pattered against the castle walls, far calmer than the tempest on their wedding night. Arya lay awake for a time, listening to the soft hush of wind, the distant crash of waves. Gendry's breathing beside her was slow, steady, reassuring. She was no stranger to roads unknown, to the precarious balancing act of identity. But now, in Storm's End, she felt perhaps she had come into a new part of herself, a part that did not compromise her spirit, but still embraced her responsibilities. A part that accepted love without losing her edge. She drifted to sleep with the sound of the sea in her ears, dreaming of storms and stags and wolves running across moonlit shores, free yet not alone. She did not need to ask what lay beyond the next sunrise. Whatever came, she would meet it head on. Such was the path she had chosen. Arya Stark, Lady of Storm's End. And for the first time in a long while, she felt at peace with the choice. The morning dawned gray and wind ruffled outside Storm's End, the sea murmuring against the cliffs with a weary regularity, as if it too had grown accustomed to the presence of the castle's inhabitants. Arya Stark awoke before first light, as was her habit, and slipped out of bed quietly to avoid disturbing Gendry. She dressed in a simple tunic and breeches, then pulled on a pair of sturdy boots and belted needle at her hip. A faint tension shimmered in the air. Today, they would begin dealing with the bandit problem in the Rainwood. The old restless energy that had propelled her across half the war-torn realm stirred in her blood once more. She stepped into the corridor, nodding at the guard who stood watch. He bowed slightly, calling her, "My lady." She offered no more than a curt, polite acknowledgement. Despite her moon or so as Lady of Storm's End, she still hadn't grown entirely comfortable with bows and titles that followed her every step. That might never change, but she had accepted it as part of life now, the same way she'd learned to accept Winterfell's lords and ladies as a child, grudgingly, but without letting it shape her too much. She found her way to the hall where the morning meal was being laid out. Bread, stew, a bit of cheese. The staff, already bustling, offered low murmurs of deference as she approached. She settled at a small table, preferring this quiet corner to the high seat reserved for her and Gendry. There, she tore off a piece of bread and dipped it in a thin stew of onions and carrots, ignoring the curious glances around her. She chewed methodically, half her mind on the upcoming task. A patter of heavier footsteps announced Gendry's arrival. She looked up to see him appear in the doorway, yawning, hair still a bit disheveled from sleep. He wore well-worn breeches, a simple leather jerkin, and boots scuffed from travel. At his side, as always when he expected trouble, he carried a hand axe in a loop on his belt. A sword might have seemed more lordly, but Gendry had discovered that the heft of an axe, or a hammer, felt more natural in his grip. He paused in the entrance, scanning the hall until he spotted her, then ambled over with a tired smile. "Up already," he said, sliding into the seat across from her. "Figured you'd be." Arya pushed the plate toward him. "You need to eat before we head out. Not that it's the best food in the world, but it'll do." Mend. He rubbed a hand over his eyes and reached for a chunk of bread. "Any word from the Castellan this morning?" he asked around a mouthful, wincing at the saltiness of the stew. Arya shook her head. "Not that I've heard, but I haven't been out to see him yet. We're supposed to meet the men in the courtyard soon, right?" Gendry nodded, swallowing. "Aye. Sir Barrett's organizing the knights. He says the group of bandits is about 24 strong, from what the scouts claim. No match for our forces if we do this right, but we don't want to underestimate them either. It's thick forest down there, easy to get ambushed." "Moriake." Arya nodded, gazing at her half-eaten bread. "I've been in forests before. She thought fleetingly of the riverlands, the endless miles of tangled woods where brigands and soldiers alike had roamed. We'll handle it. A hint of worry flickered in Gendry's eyes. Just watch yourself. This isn't a tourney. She raised an eyebrow. I've been in more real fights than half the nights in your hall, Gendry. He rolled his eyes in good humor. I'm well aware. Still, you're the Lady of Storm's End. Some might question you throwing yourself into the thick of bandit hunting. Arya snorted. They question everything about me anyway. I'd rather they question me for doing something worthwhile than for playing the lady poorly. He reached across the table and gave her hand a quick squeeze. Then let them question, and we'll do what must be done. Soon enough, they finished eating. Gendry left a few instructions with the stewards regarding the day's tasks. Repairs still needed seeing to, and a handful of minor disputes were to be postponed until they returned. Arya stood by, quietly noting the array of documents some servants tried to press into Gendry's hands, which he quickly handed back with instructions to file them until later. The mundane details of governance could wait. The bandits in the Rainwood could not. They made their way to the courtyard, where a modest force had gathered. About 20 men-at-arms, a few knights among them, and a handful of archers. Most wore the crown stag sigil on worn tabards or carried small shields displaying the Baratheon colors. A few newcomers, recently sworn swords, fidgeted uncertainly, but the veterans maintained an air of calm. Horses were saddled and waiting, stamping restlessly on the cobblestones. The castellan, a gray-haired man named Walmer, approached, bowing in that stiff way of his. My lord, my lady, the men are prepared to leave at your command. Scouts returned earlier this morning, confirming that the bandits have made a camp deeper in the Rainwood. It's rough territory. They've been ambushing travelers along the lesser roads. Nay. Gendry nodded, exchanging a quick glance with Arya. She felt her pulse quicken at the prospect of action. How far is this camp? Walmer squinted at a parchment as if the words might shift. Likely a full day's ride if you don't push too hard. If you ride swift, half a day, though the paths are muddy from last week's storms. Arya rolled her shoulders, wanting to be off already. Then let's ride swift. Best not give them time to slip away. Gendry surveyed their little company. Agreed. Sir Barrett, you'll take the lead with the scouts. I want to avoid charging into any traps. The rest of us will follow at a short distance. No. A young knight with a shock of blonde hair, Sir Barrett, stepped forward, saluted. Aye, my lord. Gendry swung up onto his horse, a sturdy brown courser that snorted under his weight. Arya followed suit, mounting a dark mare she'd grown fond of in recent weeks, one with quick feet and a calm temperament. She patted the horse's neck, then turned to the men. Move out, Gendry called, setting them in motion. They clattered out from Storm's End's gates, watched by a smattering of castle folk. Some offered muted cheers or waves. The day was cool, the sky overcast, with a faint smell of salt in the wind. As they left the looming walls behind, Arya felt a familiar sense of possibility. The path ahead was uncertain, but at least it wasn't layered with the endless courtly pretense she had endured at the Eyrie and in meeting halls. This was a more direct kind of problem to solve. Find the bandits, defeat them, restore peace to the roads. The route wound south along the coastline before turning inland. The land sloped into thick woodlands known as the Rainwood, a place where the branches curled like gnarled fingers overhead, and the undergrowth grew dense and tangled. The name suited it well. Even on drier days, the Rainwood was prone to mists and damp leaves. Clusters of moss clung to tree trunks, and the smell of wet earth hung in the air. The path was little more than a wagon track, rutted and muddy, forcing them to slow occasionally. They rode at a canter where the ground permitted, reining in to navigate narrower stretches. Sir Barrett rode at the front with 3 scouts, scanning for tracks or signs of an ambush. Gendry and Arya stayed near enough to hear the reports as the scouts drifted back periodically, muttering about footprints in the mud or suspicious breaks in the foliage. As midday approached, they paused beneath a canopy of towering pines to water the horses. The men passed around some dried meat and water. Arya, dismounting, stretched her legs and walked the perimeter, alert. She spotted faint traces of a fire ring in a clearing some distance off, a circle of stones with ashes scattered inside. One of the archers, a lean man named Gullis, approached, having noticed it too. Looks old, he said quietly, crouching to run a hand through the ash. Maybe a few days. Could have been travelers, or them. Arya nodded, scanning the trees. Leaves dripped with moisture, the ground soft underfoot. A short distance beyond the clearing, she saw a deer path winding deeper into the undergrowth. If it was them, they didn't linger long. Gullis stood, brushing off his hands. Not a large group, from the looks of it. Shall we report to Lord Gendry? Nay. She nodded, heading back to the small camp where the men waited. Gendry was tightening his horse's girth strap, brow creased. She told him what they found. He listened intently, then gestured to Sir Barrett. We'll keep going. We should reach the place the scouts mentioned by late afternoon. They mounted up again, forging deeper into the woods. The canopy thickened, and the light took on a greenish cast. The smell of wet pine needles gave Arya a faint nostalgia for the wolf's wood around Winterfell, though the Rainwood was warmer, more humid. Insects buzzed, and occasionally, they heard the screech of some unseen bird. Gradually, the track began to slope upward. The trees grew denser, creating a tunnel-like effect around them. Mud sucked at their horses' hooves. Every now and then the men had to dismount to lead the animals around fallen logs or wide puddles. The scouts pressed on, keeping an eye on any sign of disturbance, fresh footprints, snapped branches, or other clues. Late in the afternoon, Sir Barrett signaled for a halt. They had come upon a portion of the forest where massive, moss-laden oaks rose like silent giants. The shadows here were long, the underbrush thick with ferns and brambles. A faint path branched off from the main track, curving behind a rocky outcrop. Barrett inclined his head toward it. The scouts say the bandits' camp is that way, about half a mile, nestled in a hollow with a stream nearby. Gendry and Arya exchanged a look. Let's go on foot, Arya suggested. No point in riding straight in and giving ourselves away. Sir Barrett nodded. Lady Deitzel. We'll tie the horses here and post a couple of men to guard them. The rest of us can circle around, see if we can surprise them. No. Gendry slid off his horse, patting its flank to calm it. Let's do it carefully. I'd like at least 2 archers with me and Arya. He hesitated a moment, glancing at her. She nodded, stepping forward to secure her mare. The men murmured softly among themselves as they began to tie reins to low-hanging branches, removing gear they might need in a fight. They divided into 2 groups. One, led by Sir Barrett, would flank the bandit camp from one side, while Gendry, Arya, and a handful of archers would approach from the other. The men left to guard the horses looked tense but determined, each with a spear or crossbow at the ready in case any straggler tried to escape that way. Arya tugged needle free of its sheath, testing the balance in her hand. She also carried a small dagger. Gendry hefted his hand axe, adjusting it in his grip. The others carried swords, maces, short spears. Quietly they set off along the faint path. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Every crackle of a branch or squelch of mud underfoot sounded louder than it should have. A crow cawed somewhere high above, and Arya's muscles tensed. She glanced at Gendry, who kept his gaze forward, brows drawn in concentration. She understood his tension. He didn't want to see any of his men killed, nor did he want to see her harmed. But bandit hunting was rarely bloodless, and she steeled herself for whatever lay ahead. After a few minutes of weaving through a tangle of brush, they heard faint voices. Arya froze, raising a hand to still the men behind her. Indeed, from somewhere just beyond a cluster of fallen pines, she picked up the low hum of speech. Gesturing for them to proceed with caution, she led the way, creeping from trunk to trunk with practiced stealth. Years of traveling the riverlands and beyond had taught her how to move silently, and she was grateful that skill hadn't left her. At last they peered into a shallow hollow encircled by thick trees. A small camp sprawled there, perhaps a dozen or so rough tents made of patched canvas. A thin tendril of smoke rose from a campfire near the center, where a couple of men lounged, gnawing on something that looked like salted pork. She spotted at least 8 or 9 figures, some half hidden among the tents, others squatting over a makeshift dice game. Rough men, clad in mismatched leathers and carrying old swords or axes. Arya frowned. The scouts had mentioned perhaps 24 bandits, yet she saw fewer than half that. Maybe the rest were out on a raid or hidden behind the tents. She scanned the perimeter carefully, counting possible vantage points. Gendry knelt beside her, brow furrowed in thought. Two of the archers knocked arrows but held off on firing, waiting for the signal. Sir Barrett and his men would be approaching from the other side. They'd attempt a pincer maneuver, ideally corralling the bandits before they could scatter into the woods. Gendry gave Arya a meaningful look, raising his brow in silent question. "Are you ready?" She nodded, a slight tilt of her chin. Then she mouthed a single word, "Now." Gendry rose halfway, waving an arm toward the archers. They pulled back on their bowstrings, and two arrows hissed through the still air, each finding a target near the campfire. One bandit collapsed with a strangled cry, an arrow jutting from his chest. The other stumbled, hit in the shoulder. Shouts rang out. The bandits scrambled for weapons, overturning the dice game. At that same moment, Sir Barrett's group burst from the opposite side of the clearing, swords flashing. Chaos followed. Men shouted, steel clashed, and the sharp tang of blood mingled with the forest's damp scent. Arya darted forward, ducking under a wild swing from a wiry bandit who'd rushed at her with a crude axe. She slashed needle across his forearm, quick and precise. He yelped, dropping the weapon, and she kicked him to the ground before whirling to face the next threat. Gendry crashed into the fray, swinging his hand axe in a powerful arc that dented the breastplate of a bandit trying to rally the others. The man crumpled, and Gendry yanked his axe free, eyes scanning for Arya. He spotted her mid-lunge, parrying a blade with a deft ring of steel. Satisfied she was managing, he stepped forward to engage another foe, blocking a sword blow with the iron head of his axe before smashing a fist into the bandit's jaw. A handful of bandits scattered, attempting to flee into the woods. But Sir Barrett's men pressed in from the other side, cutting off easy escape. A few tried to dash for the stream, only to find archers lurking there. The twang of bowstrings carried in the air, and more men fell. Arya sank deeper into that calm place of focus where each heartbeat and breath felt measured. She ducked another blow, pivoted, and sank needle into a bandit's side. He howled, staggered, and she pulled the blade free, ignoring the spatter of blood. Yet even amid the fight, she remained keenly aware of her surroundings, where Gendry stood, where the other men from Storm's End advanced, how the bandits moved. She recalled the dire lessons she had learned in Braavos, in the War of the Five Kings, in the long night's darkness. Combat was chaos, but if you mastered your own movement, you could carve a path through it. Within minutes, the bandits who hadn't been slain or wounded began to see the hopelessness. Shouts of surrender rose sporadically, though some men fought on with desperate ferocity. One, a tall, scarred fellow with a battered shield, lunged at Gendry. Gendry blocked with his axe, but the man was strong, and the blow jarred him. Arya rushed forward, slashing the man's calf from behind. He went down hard, and Gendry finished him with a grim strike to the helmet. A few heartbeats later, a hush settled. Groans of the injured broke the silence, and the acrid smell of spilled blood rose into the damp air. Sir Barrett and his men had subdued several bandits who still lived, forcing them to their knees in the mud. Arya surveyed the sight, chest heaving, hair plastered to her forehead. She saw men from Storm's End picking their way among the tents, searching for any hidden enemies or stolen goods. Gendry wiped sweat from his brow, stepping over the body of a man he'd felled. His gaze fell on Arya, and relief flickered across his face. She was alive, apparently unhurt except for a small tear in her sleeve. She nodded to him, and he let out a breath, turning to bark orders. "Check the tents, see if there's anything worth recovering," he said. "Tie up those that surrendered. Tend to our wounded. Quickly, now." "Nade worry nade." Arya looked around. One of the archers knelt over a fallen comrade, pressing a hand to the man's bleeding side. A swirl of regret twisted in her gut. Even a small skirmish could claim lives. She hurried over to see if she could help. The wounded soldier clutched at the dirt, pain contorting his face. She recognized him as Tommen, a quiet youth who had joined Storm's End's ranks only 2 moons ago. She knelt, setting needle aside for a moment. "Let me see." She gently pried his shaking hands away, revealing a sword gash that ran from just below the ribs to his waist. It was bleeding heavily, but perhaps not mortal if they could stop the flow. Arya had picked up more than a few rudimentary healing skills on her travels. She wasn't a maester, but she knew how to stitch a wound and bandage it properly. "Fetch a cloth," she told the archer, who scrambled to obey. Arya pressed her own kerchief against the wound, applying steady pressure. "Hold on, Tommen. You'll be all right." He gritted his teeth, nodding faintly. "My lady," he hissed. He didn't resist as she pressed the cloth firmly against his side. Someone else passed her a strip of bandage and a vial of sour-smelling liquor to clean the wound. She kept her focus, ignoring the swirling chaos of men searching bodies, gathering the dead. In time, the bleeding slowed. Arya wrapped the wound as best she could, giving Tommen water to sip. "We'll get you on a horse," she said. "You'll ride back to the castle, see the maester." The soldier's face was pale, but there was resolve in his eyes. Meanwhile, Gendry conferred with Sir Barrett. "How many of our men did we lose?" "2 dead," Barrett said grimly. "A few wounded, Tommen worst of all, I think. The bandits lost a dozen. We have 4 or 5 in custody." Gendry looked over at the kneeling bandits, their hands bound behind them. They glared or trembled, each wearing the hardened or hollow look of men who had lived outside the law for too long. "We can't just let them go," Gendry said quietly. "But our dungeons aren't huge either." Arya emerged from Tommen's side, wiping her bloody hands on a rag. She glanced at the prisoners. "Storm's End has a few cells," she said. "If these men have raided villages, murdered travelers, they need punishment. That's how it works, yes?" Gendry nodded, but he looked weary. "Hey, we'll bring them back. They'll stand judgment. If it's proven they killed innocents, well, the punishment for banditry is usually hanging or the sword." He exhaled, the weight of lordship pressing on him. He'd sworn to protect these lands. Taking a life in the heat of battle was one thing, ordering an execution was another. But it was his duty. Arya's gaze flicked across the camp. She spotted 2 battered chests near one of the tents. Men from Storm's End pried them open, revealing a small stash of coins, trinkets, and valuables, no doubt pilfered from unlucky merchants who'd ventured through the forest. "We'll reclaim all that," Arya said. "Maybe some can be returned to rightful owners. The rest, keep it for the castle's coffers, put it toward repairs." She glanced at Gendry for confirmation. He offered a somber nod. "Agreed." They spent the next hour securing the bandits, tending to the wounded, and searching the campsite thoroughly. Though the scouts had believed there might be 24 outlaws, only about 15 had been present, 8 of them dead, 3 mortally wounded, 4 captured. The rest, if there were more, must have been out roaming. Arya and Gendry exchanged uneasy looks over that. This wasn't the final blow, but it was a start. "Sir Barrett," Gendry said as the men prepared to head back. "Stay with a small detachment here. See if the rest return. If they do, capture or kill them. We can't leave them free to terrorize the roads." "Aye, my lord," the knight replied, bowing. He selected 5 men to remain, each of them ready to build a concealed vantage in the woods. The plan was that they'd wait a day or 2 lying in ambush for any returning bandits. The rest would escort the prisoners and the wounded back to Storm's End. Arya helped ease Tommen onto a makeshift stretcher strapped between 2 horses, ensuring he was as comfortable as possible. The other wounded men rode double, bandaged hastily but stable enough to travel. The dead were wrapped in canvas to be brought back for proper rites. It was a grim procession leaving that hollow in the Rainwood, the sun already dipping behind the dense canopy, painting the mossy ground with gold and shadow. They rode in near silence. Blood and mud caked their boots. Arya felt the day's events weighing on her, a swirl of victory, sorrow for the losses, and a sober reminder that even a small corner of Westeros was never entirely safe. Gendry, at her side, wore a haunted look. She reached out and brushed his forearm in a gesture of solidarity, though neither of them spoke. The path was long, and the day had tested them both. Night fell before they made it to Storm's End, forcing them to travel slowly for the last mile by torchlight. The fortress loomed large against the sky, its walls lit by fire baskets. Word of their return spread, and guards hurried to open the gates. Servants, stable hands, and a few concerned retainers rushed into the courtyard to greet them. Arya swung off her horse, stiff from hours in the saddle. Gendry dismounted, immediately beckoning for the maester to tend to Tommen and the other injured. The prisoners, still bound, were taken to the dungeon under heavy guard. A hush fell over the courtyard, punctuated by groans of the wounded and the scrape of boots on wet cobbles. Thunder mumbled in the distance, as if the weather threatened another storm soon. With the immediate matters settled, Arya followed Gendry inside, staying close by. She could see the slump of his shoulders, how fatigue had carved lines under his eyes. Someone offered them cups of watered wine near the entry hall, and Gendry downed his in 2 gulps. Arya sipped hers more slowly, leaning against the cold stone wall. "That was something," he muttered, voice thick with weariness. "We've handled a problem, but it's only one problem, and 2 of our men are dead." Arya rested a hand on his arm. "We did what we had to. The bandits would have killed more if we hadn't acted." He nodded dully, as if trying to convince himself. "I know. Still hate to lose anyone. Tomorrow I'll write letters to their families, offer compensation, though no coin can truly mend that kind of loss." She regarded him quietly, recalling how casual lords like Tywin Lannister had once been about casualties, or how Roose Bolton had shown no remorse. Gendry was different, and that was a large part of why she'd agreed to marry him. He cared. "Good," she said. "We pay our respects properly." They parted ways briefly to clean up, Arya making her way to her own chamber, where a basin of hot water awaited. She peeled off her muddy, blood-stained clothing, scrubbing at her arms until the water ran red. She stared at her reflection in the dim light, noticing the bruises on her forearms where a bandit's blow had glanced off. Her face looked the same as ever, yet she felt older. Sometimes it struck her how many battles she had lived through, and how each one settled into her bones like a quiet memory of violence. When she emerged in a fresh tunic and leggings, Gendry was waiting by the hearth in their shared chamber. He wore a clean shirt, though the lines of exhaustion on his face seemed more pronounced. She moved toward him, and they stood in silence for a moment, letting the warmth of the fire slip over them. Outside, a soft patter of rain began, tapping against the narrow windows. "Are you hurt?" he asked quietly, scanning her as if expecting to see new wounds. "Just a bruise or 2, she replied. "You?" He shrugged. "I'm fine." A log popped in the fireplace, sparks dancing up the chimney. Arya stepped closer to him, resting a palm on his chest. She could feel the thud of his heart beneath her hand. He let out a slow breath and pressed his forehead against hers. They stood there in that small circle of warmth, bound by shared fatigue and a determination to protect the people of Storm's End. For a time, neither spoke. Then, Arya slipped her arms around his waist, and he wrapped her in an embrace that conveyed all the tension of the day, all the relief that they were both alive. They slept deeply that night, lulled by the patter of rain. At dawn, they rose to face the aftermath. First, attending to the wounded in the master's chambers. Tommen clung to life, but the maester insisted he had a fair chance. The other injured men fared better. The 2 who'd died were laid out in Storm's End's small sept, candles flickering. Gendry and Arya paid their respects, standing in somber silence before the still forms. Gendry arranged to send a rider with messages to the families. Arya hovered at his side, watching him scrawl the letters in rough, earnest script. In the dungeon, the surviving bandits awaited judgment. Gendry called a small audience in the great hall. Arya stood with him, a short distance behind and to his left, as the captives were brought forth in chains. One man, filthy hair plastered across his face, spat at the floor, shouting curses about how lords cared nothing for the poor. Another stared at the ground, trembling. A third tried to beg for mercy. Gendry's jaw tensed, his voice firm. "You ambushed travelers on the roads and murdered them for profit. You robbed honest folk. There is no justification for that. By the laws of the realm, the punishment for banditry is death." He paused, scanning their faces. "But if any of you can provide reason or proof of lesser crimes, speak now." A ragged hush followed. One of the men stammered that he had joined the group only under threat of violence, that he'd never actually killed anyone. Arya studied him, trying to gauge the truth in his eyes, but she knew men would say anything to avoid the headsman's axe. Gendry too listened with a guarded expression. He conferred briefly with the steward and Sir Barrett, who had returned in the night. Unsurprisingly, no more bandits had shown up at the camp. In the end, Gendry ordered 3 of them hanged for confirmed murders, while the one who claimed forced servitude would be held pending further inquiry. Another man, mortally wounded from an arrow, died before the sentence could be carried out. The prisoners were led away in grim silence. After they were gone, Gendry sank onto the high seat, exhaustion pulling at him again. Arya approached, setting a hand lightly on his shoulder. You did what needed doing, she said, her voice gentle. Justice is harsh, but it's how we protect these people. He gave her a wan smile. I never imagined myself in this role, you know. Ordering executions, writing letters of condolence. When I was a boy at the forge, I barely knew what a lord did, except that they wore fine clothes and swung fancy swords. He trailed off, eyes distant. Arya squeezed his shoulder. She could relate. Neither of them had exactly planned for this life. We'll manage, she murmured. And next time, maybe fewer will die. If people know Storm's End is protected, bandits might think twice. He nodded, running a hand through his hair. You're right. Then he turned to her, a spark of curiosity in his eyes. Are you all right? She tilted her head. Why wouldn't I be? He shrugged, leaning back. All the blood, the fighting, the finality of it all. It's what we do, but I can't help thinking it wears on you. She studied his face a moment. It does. But I've seen so much, Gendry. Maybe that's sad, but it takes more than a few outlaws and a bit of blood to rattle me now. Her voice softened. Doesn't mean I like it, but I can bear it. He nodded, then stood. Let's handle the rest of the day's tasks and maybe get some fresh air. I've had enough gloom for one morning. The day passed in a steady rhythm of responsibilities. Gendry held a short court session for local disputes, neighbors bickering over a boundary line, a farmer complaining about missing sheep. Arya quietly observed, occasionally offering a direct question that cut through rambling arguments. Some of the petitioners cast surprised looks her way, unaccustomed to a lady with such a brusque manner, but none dared speak against her. Gendry tried to maintain a calm, measured tone, though now and again he cracked an exasperated grin at Arya's bluntness. In the afternoon, a courier arrived bearing a sealed letter from King's Landing. The regent or his council, presumably. Gendry received it in the solar with Arya present. He read the contents, then passed it to her. She recognized a few official seals from the crown, stately language, as always. The gist was that the crown wished to confirm Lord Gendry Baratheon's loyalty, requesting that he send a contingent of men to aid in maintaining order along certain trade routes near the Rose Rot. Or so the letter claimed. Arya narrowed her eyes. Maintaining order, or fighting someone else's battle? Gendry exhaled. Hard to say. The crown might be flexing its authority. We owe them fealty in principle, since they legitimized me. But the stormlands can't just send men to chase bandits hundreds of miles away, if it leaves our own territory vulnerable. The letter also references taxes. They want to ensure we're paying in full. Nyah. Arya snorted. We pay what's fair. They probably just want more coin. That's how the crown always is, isn't it? He half smiled, though the worry in his eyes remained. We'll have to respond carefully. I don't want to anger them unnecessarily, but also can't deplete our forces. Let me think on it. They drafted a polite reply, expressing regret that current obligations in the Stormlands prevented them from sending significant help, but offering a token force, perhaps a small group of knights, to show goodwill. As for taxes, Gendry included a courteous note that Storm's End would soon send the next installment, along with an account of the region's finances. Arya, leaning over his shoulder while he wrote, had to hold back a sigh at the endless niceties. But she knew if they offended the crown, it could invite trouble. By late afternoon, they took a break from the swirl of obligations and retreated to the courtyard. Dark clouds hovered on the horizon, but for now, the rain had ceased. Arya walked with Gendry to the training yard, where a few guards were sparring. The ring of steel on steel carried through the damp air, oddly comforting in its familiarity. Care to practice? Gendry asked, gesturing at the practice swords. The men paused, noticing their lord and lady. Arya slipped off her cloak. Always. She strode to the rack, choosing a slender wooden blade that approximated Needle's balance. Gendry selected a heavier one. He was larger and stronger, but Arya had speed and technique. They squared off in the dirt of the yard, ignoring the curious gazes of the onlookers. A hush fell as the two faced each other, Lord and Lady of Storm's End, about to dance in a flurry of mock combat. Arya moved first, darting forward with a thrust that forced Gendry to block high. She slipped beneath his guard, tapping his ribs lightly. He grunted, stepping back. A smirk tugged at her lips, but she stayed alert. Gendry circled, feinting low, then bringing his wooden blade around in a hard arc. Arya deflected it, but the force numbed her forearm. She grimaced. He was strong indeed. They exchanged blows in a fast series, the clack of wood echoing. A small crowd gathered, guards, servants, even a few knights. They watched with fascination, perhaps never having seen a noble couple engage in such lively sparring. Arya was unrelenting, pressing Gendry with swift jabs, but he managed to parry, using his longer reach to keep her at bay. Still, whenever he thought he had her pinned, she twisted free, landing a quick rap on his shoulder or back. After several minutes, both were breathing hard, sweat beading on their foreheads. A final exchange saw Arya feint left, duck right, and tap Gendry's thigh. He stumbled, ceding ground, and then lifted his sword to signal surrender. A burst of laughter rippled through the onlookers, surprised or delighted at the display. Gendry shook his head, half grinning, half exasperated. "You're too quick," he panted, dropping his guard. Arya shrugged, chest heaving. "You're getting better at reading me, though," she said. "Couple times I thought you'd land a real blow." She stepped back, returning the practice sword to the rack. The watchers offered scattered applause. Gendry gave them a sheepish nod. "Show's over," he said wryly. They strolled away from the yard, heart still pounding, and Arya felt a brief rush of endorphins cutting through the day's heaviness. She glanced at Gendry. "You keep practicing like that, maybe you'll best me one day." He raised an eyebrow. "You think so?" "No," she replied with mock seriousness. Then she broke into a grin. He laughed, and for a moment, the tension that had dogged them since the bandit raid lifted. The days rolled on, filled with the business of repairing the castle's upper parapets, rationing out grain from the storehouses, and dealing with the petty disputes of the small folk who relied on Storm's End for protection. Arya discovered she had a knack for cutting through nonsense, though her direct approach often caught people off guard. Gendry balanced her bluntness with a gentler diplomacy, asking questions that drew out more detail. Together they navigated each new problem. A few more scouts returned from the Rainwood bearing news that the remaining bandits had scattered. Sir Barrett's party had skirmished with another small group, slaying 2 and capturing 1. For now, the road seemed safer. Caravans from the Reach began arriving more regularly, bringing produce and supplies. In turn, Gendry arranged for shipments of stormlands timber to be sent down the coast, forging small but steady trade deals. On one chilly evening, a raven arrived from Winterfell. Arya recognized Sansa's tidy handwriting as she unfurled the note by the warmth of the Solar's fireplace. Gendry was hunched over a map, considering the best routes to send the next shipment of lumber. Arya scanned the letter, eyes flicking quickly across the page. "She says the Vale's negotiations went well," Arya reported. "Robert Arryn's region is stabilizing things. Sansa is back at Winterfell now, managing the region. She asks how we fare. She also says there are rumors from across the Narrow Sea, something about mercenary companies shifting alliances, possibly involving leftover followers of Cersei or Daenerys. She's not sure. She wants to know if we've heard anything from King's Landing." Gendry rubbed his chin. "We got that letter from the Crown, but it was just about men and taxes. Didn't mention anything about Essos or mercenary companies. Might be that the Crown's hush-hush about it." "No." Arya's mouth tightened. She remembered Bravos, Pentos, the labyrinth of plots one could find across the sea. Well, if mercenaries are on the move, it might mean someone with coin is looking to stir trouble here. Could be a pretender to the throne, or some exiled lord seeking vengeance. Gendry's expression hardened. "We'll stay alert. The last thing the realm needs is another war. Let's respond to Sansa with what we know." "Not much, but at least we can keep each other informed." Arya nodded, folding the letter. She took a fresh parchment and began to draft a reply. Her writing was blunt, no flowery language. She informed Sansa of the bandit situation, the Crown's demands, and their suspicion that King's Landing might be withholding news of foreign intrigues. When finished, she sprinkled the page with sand, then sealed it with wax, pressing the wolf's head ring Sansa had gifted her into the hot wax. Once cooled, she handed it off to a waiting Raven Master. Weeks turned to months. Storm's End settled into a tenuous peace, with Gendry and Arya finding their stride as lord and lady. The storms that gave the castle its name came in full force at times, howling winds, drenching rains, but the walls held as they had for generations. Through it all, they continued to rebuild the fortress, sending out men to reinforce the roads. Farmers reported better yields, and travelers found safer passage. Slowly, a sense of stability took root. On a crisp morning, they decided to ride along the coast, inspecting a small fishing village that had been complaining of damaged docks. A retinue of half a dozen men followed, but Arya insisted on riding at the front with Gendry. The air smelled of salt and seaweed, the horizon glimmering with pale sunlight. The crash of waves against rock accompanied them like a distant drumbeat. When they arrived at the village, little more than a cluster of huts, a few boats, and a run-down jetty, an old fisherman met them. He bowed awkwardly, cap in hand. "My lord, my lady, the storms battered our dock. We've patched what we can, but the timbers are rotten. We can't afford new wood from the yard. If the boats can't come in, we'll starve once winter hits." Gendry dismounted, surveying the ramshackle dock. Rotted boards, missing planks, the entire thing listing precariously. He tapped his chin. "We have enough lumber stockpiled at Storm's End. I'll send you some, but you'll need carpenters too. If we do nothing, you'll lose your livelihood." The old man's eyes lit up. "That'd be a mercy, my lord." Arya glanced around at the villagers who peeked from windows or hovered near the shore. "We'll send help as soon as we can," she said. "Just make sure your people are ready to do the labor. We can't spare too many men." "Bless you," the fisherman breathed, bowing again. They spent the morning inspecting the village, taking note of what else might be required. Repairs to the storehouse roof, better drainage to prevent flooding. Arya listened to the fisherfolk talk about their catches, the shifting tides, and occasional rumors of pirate activity further south. Gendry assured them that Storm's End would keep watch on the seas. As they prepared to depart, the villagers offered dried fish as a gift, pressing it into the hands of the guards. Arya, not especially fond of the fish's pungent smell, thanked them politely anyway. Riding back, Gendry turned to Arya. "This is what being a lord is about, looking after people who can't do it alone. And it feels good to fix something without having to kill anyone." She shot him a wry look. "Don't get too comfortable. We've not heard the last from King's Landing, I'm sure." He sighed. "True enough, but for now we do what we can." Their path skirted the shoreline. Arya reined her mare closer to the cliff's edge, marveling at the way the sea stretched out, restless and endless. Gendry followed, carefully guiding his stallion. The day was bright, gulls calling overhead, but the wind carried a chill hinting that winter was creeping closer, even this far south. The cold found its way eventually. Arya's cloak fluttered behind her, and she felt alive, filled with the simple joy of an open sky and the thunder of surf below. Gendry watched her from the corner of his eye, a soft smile tugging at his lips. "You love this, don't you? Being out in the open, riding free." "Nis Sal." She nodded, letting her mare pick a careful path along the rocky ground. "It reminds me of the north, in a way. Somewhere wild. Even if it's different, I can smell the salt and feel the wind, and I don't know. I can breathe." He considered that, looking down at the waves. "I used to imagine the sea would feel like freedom. When I was a boy in King's Landing, the water seemed far away, out of reach. Now it's ours in a sense." She shot him a half-smile. "Yes. Though don't forget, the sea doesn't truly belong to anyone. It'll swallow us whole if we're careless." One said she. He laughed, the sound carried off by the wind. "Fair point." They paused to let the horses drink from a small freshwater stream that trickled down to the ocean. Arya hopped off her mare, stepping onto a slab of stone near the cliff's edge. She gazed at the horizon, imagining distant lands beyond the water, Essos, the Summer Isles, places she might never see. A quiet yearning flared in her chest, the same wandering spirit that had taken her across the sea to Braavos. But now she had responsibilities anchoring her here, a choice she had willingly made. She felt Gendry's presence behind her. "Sometimes I wonder," she murmured, half to herself, "what it would be like if we could sail away, explore, see the edges of the world." He moved beside her, following her gaze. Maybe one day we can, he said softly. But the stormlands need us for now. She turned toward him, reading the sincerity in his eyes. I know, and I'm here by my own will. Doesn't stop me from dreaming though. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Dreams keep us alive, Arya. We can still have them, even if we have duties. She nodded, leaning into him for a moment. A gull screeched, and she closed her eyes, letting the wind wash over them. Then she pulled away gently, mounting her mare again. Gendry followed suit. They guided the horses back to the main path and returned to Storm's End, quietly content with the day's small progress. That evening, as they settled in the Lord Solar, the Castellan delivered a series of reports. One caught Arya's attention, rumors of ironborn raiders along the coast north of them. Nothing confirmed, but a few fishermen swore they'd seen suspicious sails. Gendry frowned. The Iron Islands haven't openly raided in a while. Are they going back to the old ways? Arya tapped the parchment. If it's true, we'd better keep an eye out. Storm's End might not be their prime target, but smaller villages could be easy pickings. We'll send word along the coast to watch for strangers at sea. The next few days they received more tidings, mixed reports, contradicting one another. Some swore they saw ironborn ships lurking near the stepstones. Others insisted it was just merchant vessels. The only certainty was that tension was brewing somewhere out on the water. Gendry ordered a small watchtower on a headland to be reinforced, posting additional men there with a horn to raise the alarm if raiders were spotted. Meanwhile, the daily tasks continued unabated. Letters arrived from lords in the Stormlands interior, asking for Gendry's presence to settle old disputes. Arya and Gendry debated traveling inland to meet them, but decided to wait. If the coast was under threat, they couldn't both be absent. Instead, they invited the lords to come to Storm's End. Many grumbled at the inconvenience, but Arya's simple response was that they were lords under House Baratheon. If they wanted an audience, they could damn well come. One morning, Sir Barrett approached them in the courtyard, a piece of parchment in hand. My lord, my lady, urgent news. A ship docked at Evenfall Hall on Tarth last night, carrying a message from Brienne of Tarth. She's in King's Landing apparently, but she warns that a group of Sellswords might be sailing around the southern coasts sponsored by, well, the letter's unclear but suggests they have backing from wealthy lords who oppose the crown's current rule. 9. Arya's brow furrowed. Brienne of Tarth, she's loyal to Sansa in the north, served my mother once. If she's sending a warning, we should take it seriously. Gendry rubbed his jaw. Sellswords with questionable backing. Could that tie in with the rumors from Essos? Maybe a group has come west, looking for opportunities. If they're skilled, they might try to plunder or create unrest. Arya nodded grimly. We should prepare. If they strike anywhere near Storm's End, we'll be ready. Send word to Tarth. Let them know we'll assist if needed. We should also let Sansa know what we've heard, though she likely has her own channels. Sir Barrett saluted. At once. As the knight hurried off, Arya and Gendry exchanged a look. She could see the tension in his posture. The realm was never truly at peace. From the War of the Five Kings to the Long Night, from the ephemeral calm after the Great War to these new stirrings, it seemed they would never have a simple time to just live. But perhaps that was the nature of Westeros. It devoured complacency and demanded constant vigilance. Late that afternoon, they sparred again in the yard, pushing themselves until sweat poured and their breath came ragged. Then they sat on a bench near the armory, side by side gazing at the sea. Gendry massaged his sword arm, wincing slightly. If these Sellswords show up, I'll need my full strength, he said. Arya smirked. You'll manage. Maybe you should try forging again, build up those muscles. He laughed. I do miss the forge sometimes. Maybe I'll commission a new weapon just for the fun of it, something that suits me better than these lordly blades. Arya raised an eyebrow. Like a warhammer, your father's preferred weapon from what I hear. A hint of pride flickered in Gendry's eyes at the mention of Robert Baratheon, though father was a complicated concept for him. Hey, a hammer. But lighter, balanced. I want it to sing in my hands when I swing it. Now. Arya leaned back, letting the breeze cool her flushed face. She thought of Needle, which had been with her through so much. Weapons are personal, she said softly. They become part of you. He glanced at her, eyes warm. Like Needle is to you. She nodded, a distant look in her gaze. Yes. Silence settled between them as they watched the surf crash beyond the castle walls. The yard was emptying. Men drifted away to their evening meals, while others took up watch duties. Arya's mind wandered to the possibility of sailing out if the sellsword struck, meeting them on the water. She remembered the feel of sea spray on her face, the tang of salt. She had no fear of it, only a cautious respect. Eventually, they rose and returned inside, discussing potential strategies if trouble came. Gendry wanted to bolster the castle's small fleet of boats. Storm's End didn't have a vast navy, but it had a few ships that could be used to patrol. Arya suggested recruiting skilled sailors from the local villages. We'll pay them fairly, so they don't have reason to turn pirate themselves, she said dryly. In the weeks that followed, the tension ebbed and flowed. A few sightings of suspicious ships were reported, but no direct attacks materialized. The Crown's envoys visited Storm's End to assess tax matters, departing with a mixture of satisfaction and caution. Gendry handled them politely, though Arya sensed he found their presence grating. She kept her distance during those meetings, letting him do the smooth talk. She preferred the training yard or rides through the countryside, though she recognized the necessity of the political game. Winter in the Stormlands was milder than in the north, but the skies often grew leaden, and rain could last for days on end. One such dreary afternoon, Arya was in the library, a modest room by Winterfell standards, but containing records of Storm's End's lineages and holdings. She thumbed through old documents more out of curiosity than duty, scanning the storied history of House Baratheon. She found references to Orys Baratheon, rumored to be a half-brother to Aegon the Conqueror, who took this castle centuries past. In reading, she gleaned a sense of how Gendry's own story mirrored that old fable. A bastard forging a legacy in the Stormlands. And now she, a wolf of the north, had joined that legacy. She traced her fingers over the cracked ink, thinking about how fate twisted destinies in ways no one could predict. The door creaked open, and Gendry stepped in, shaking droplets of rain from his cloak. "Here you are," he said, smiling a little. "I wouldn't have guessed you in the library." She snorted softly. "I'm full of surprises." She held up the parchment she'd been examining. Reading about Orys Baratheon. Gendry peered at the text. Father of the line. They say he was half a Targaryen, though he never claimed it. Brave warrior, helped conquer the Stormlands and wed the daughter of the last Storm King. I suppose he's why I'm even here at all. Arya rolled up the parchment, setting it aside. Makes you think how different things might have been if the Targaryens never crossed the sea, or if Robert never sat the Iron Throne. Maybe you'd still be a smith in Flea Bottom and I'd be. She trailed off, imagining her own fate if the Lannisters had never executed her father, or if the War of the Five Kings had never sparked. Gendry stepped closer, gently tilting her chin so she met his gaze. "We're here now," he said softly. "You and I, that's enough for me?" A flicker of emotion passed across her face. Relief, gratitude, something deeper. She smiled and set a hand against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. The rain drummed on the windows, turning the world outside to a wash of gray. Inside, the candlelight made the library feel almost cozy, and Arya rested her head briefly on his shoulder. Just then the door opened again, and Sir Barrett poked his head in, looking apologetic. "My lord, my lady, sorry to disturb you, but there's a messenger from the coast. He says there's been a sighting of strange ships near Shipbreaker Bay. He's drenched to the bone, claims he saw black sails with some unknown sigil." Arya pulled away from Gendry, her eyes narrowing. Unknown sigil. Could be those sellswords after all. Gendry nodded grimly. "Let's go speak to him." They left the library, following Sir Barrett down a corridor to a small receiving room where a soaked fisherman stood, clasping a sodden hat. He bowed repeatedly. My lord, my lady, I was out checking lobster traps off the point, and I saw a pair of ships, black sails, no clear markings, looked like they were scouting the coast. When they spotted me, they turned away, heading south. I rode in fast as I could to warn you." Gendry exchanged a look with Arya. "You did well to come here," he told the fisherman, signaling for a servant to bring the man a towel and some hot drink. "We'll keep watch. Did you see if they were heavily armed?" The fisherman shook his head, water droplets flying. "Couldn't say for sure. They sat low in the water, might have been carrying cargo or men. Didn't look like simple traders, though. Arya clasped her hands behind her back. Stay in the castle tonight if you wish. Tomorrow we'll send you home with an escort. Be cautious on the water. He nodded gratefully, shivering. A steward led him away, leaving Gendry and Arya with Sir Barrett. The knight's face was set in grim lines. If they're scouting, they might come back in greater numbers. We can put archers on the walls, but we've only a few ships to meet them at sea. Gendry nodded. We should light signal fires along the coast if we spot them. Raise the alarm. Storm's End can withstand a siege if it comes to that, but hopefully they won't be so bold. Arya's mind churned with possibilities. They might try to land at a smaller cove, raid a village, then vanish before we arrive. We should send horse patrols along the coastline, keep them moving. If we see anything suspicious, we ride out. Sir Barrett saluted. I'll see to it, my lady. The next few days were tense. Storm's End posted extra lookouts, and mounted patrols scoured the coast. The fishermen who plied the waters were on edge, reporting every shape or sail on the horizon. Gendry set up a rotating watch so that no corner of the coastline would go unguarded. Arya found herself riding out at dawn, returning by dusk, scanning for signs of an incursion. Everywhere they went, people asked if trouble was coming. She and Gendry did their best to reassure them without making false promises. Then, on a storm-lashed afternoon, the alarm horn sounded from the watchtower. Arya heard the distant blare echo across the rain-beaten courtyard. She grabbed her cloak, called for a horse, and rushed to meet Gendry at the gates. He was already mounted, face grim. Lightning flickered across the sky, thunder rolling ominously. Report says a ship's been spotted, heading toward the cove near Greenwood Point, Gendry shouted over the wind. We're taking a patrol out. Arya nodded, swinging into the saddle. Let's go. They galloped through sheets of rain, a dozen riders trailing behind, hooves churning the muddy ground. The wind tore at their cloaks and thunder boomed overhead. As they neared Greenwood Point, the smell of brine intensified and the waves crashed violently against the cliffs. A scout met them, panting, pointing toward the cove below. Through the lashing rain, Arya could make out the shape of a dark-hulled ship anchored off the rocky shore, a smaller boat rowing in. There's men down there, the scout yelled over the storm. They have landed, 8 or 9 from what we saw. Armed. Look like sellswords or raiders. Arya gripped her reins. We'll have to go down on foot. The path to the cove was narrow, too treacherous for a mounted charge. Gendry nodded, eyes narrowing. They dismounted, ordering half their men to remain with the horses. The rest drew weapons and followed them down a slippery, winding trail cut into the cliffside. Wind buffeted them, the rain stinging their faces. Arya kept needle in hand, each step cautious on the slick rock. Gendry ahead of her gripped his axe. They could see figures on the shore now, tall silhouettes in dark leathers, one carrying a banner that whipped in the wind, though the sigil was unrecognizable in the gloom. The men appeared to be unloading crates from the rowboat, or perhaps bringing something ashore. The watchers spotted Arya's group, shouting an alarm. Weapons were drawn. Lightning illuminated the scene in stark flashes. Sellswords forming a line near the water, the ship looming offshore, battered by rain. Gendry raised his axe, gesturing for the men to advance. Arya surged forward, ignoring the pounding rain that soaked her hair to her scalp. The Sellswords opened fire with crossbows, bolts hissing through the downpour. One of Gendry's men cried out, struck in the thigh. Arya darted behind a rock outcrop, heart hammering. She waited for a lull in the bolts, then sprinted forward, closing distance. Gendry followed, raising his axe to deflect a bolt that glanced off. They clashed near the water's edge, the roar of the sea mingling with thunder. Arya stabbed at a bearded sellsword, her blade lancing his side. He stumbled, and she kicked him back. Another lunged with a short spear. She twisted aside, hooking her foot behind his ankle to send him sprawling. Rain made every movement precarious, but her training guided her steps. Gendry bellowed, swinging his axe in a brutal arc that knocked a swordsman into the surf. The Sellswords fought hard, well-trained and desperate. Arya realized these weren't just ragtag riders. Their stances and tactics showed discipline. She parried a slash, feeling the vibration jar her arm. A crossbow bolt thudded into the sand inches from her foot. She cursed, diving behind a half-submerged rock. Gendry roared, charging the crossbowman before he could reload, the axe cleaving the man's weapon in two. Another sellsword came at Gendry's flank, but a Storm's End guard intercepted him, steel clanging amid the rain. Lightning flashed again, illuminating a figure in dark mail that faced Arya, sword raised in a guarded stance. The man's face was partially hidden by a half-helm, but from his posture, Arya sensed confidence. She advanced, needle angled low. Water dripped from her brow, stinging her eyes. The man struck first, a swift downward slash. She sidestepped, flicking needle toward his ribs. He jerked back, parrying with a deft twist. Their blades locked, and Arya felt the strength in his arms pushing against her. She disengaged, stepping back carefully on the rain-slick stones, letting him come to her. He lunged again, this time with a feint that nearly caught her off guard. She twisted, feeling the tip of his blade graze her shoulder, slicing cloth. Ignoring the sting, she retaliated with a lightning-fast thrust that scored across his forearm. He hissed, staggering. She pressed the advantage, but he was quick, recovering with a spinning strike that forced her to duck. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Gendry wrestling with another sellsword, their weapons tangled. More crossbow bolts flew, though fewer now as the Storm's End men pressed forward. The rowboat was adrift, a couple of sellswords trying to drag crates across the shore. Arya refocused on her opponent, trading blows in a flurry of steel. He was skilled, but she was faster. Step by step, she maneuvered him closer to a large rock, slicked with seaweed. He lunged again, but she angled needle in a tight circle, batting his blade aside. His footing slipped on the rock, and she seized the moment, driving the needle's tip into his torso. A startled grunt escaped him, and he dropped to his knees, sword clattering on the stone. Arya grimaced, yanking her blade free. Blood mingled with the rain, washing away in a crimson stream toward the churning sea. She turned to see how the rest of the fight fared. Gendry had just floored his opponent, slamming the man's head into a rock. Another sellsword lay unconscious or worse in the surf. The Storm's End men advanced methodically, outnumbering the raiders now. A few sellswords tried to scramble back into the rowboat, but archers picked them off from the shore. Within moments the struggle ended. Dead and wounded raiders littered the rocky sand, and the crates they had been hauling lay half-submerged. Arya's breath came in ragged gasps, the cold rain pounding her shoulders. Lightning lit the scene once more, revealing the battered bodies. Gendry wiped water from his face, scanning the area. "We have a couple prisoners alive," he shouted over the wind. One guard nodded, nudging a wounded sellsword onto his back. The man groaned, clutching a crossbow bolt in his side. Another survivor was pinned by a broken crate. Gendry stepped over, hauling the crate aside, then kicking away the man's sword. A few more guards rummaged through the half-sunken boxes, pulling out swords, spears, and small barrels. Arya peered at the barrels, blinking against the rain. They bore no identifying marks, only a faint scratch that might be a coded emblem. "Could be contraband," she said. "Or supplies. I wonder where they planned to take it." Gendry crouched by one of the wounded raiders, voice harsh. "Who are you working for? Why come here?" The man spat out seawater, grimacing in pain. He gave no response, only a glare. Gendry looked at the other prisoner who trembled, eyes rolling with shock. "Talk, or we'll leave you for the crabs." That prisoner coughed, blood flecking his lips. "Hired, from the free cities, good coin, told to land on these coasts, gather, cause, chaos, I don't—" He broke off, gasping. Arya's mouth pressed into a line. "Who hired you?" He shook his head, either unwilling or unable to say more. A wave crashed, spraying them with salt water. The men from Storm's End circled closer, forming a small ring around the captives. Gendry stood, thunder rumbling overhead. "We'll take them back, question them further. Maybe the maester can patch them up enough to speak, or they'll die on the road. Either way, we can't stay here." Arya nodded. "What about the ship out there?" She squinted through the haze. The larger vessel had pulled anchor, drifting farther from shore. Gendry swore under his breath. "They're escaping. We can't reach them in the storm, not without a proper ship, and by the time we get one, they'll be gone." He glowered out at the dark shape vanishing into the gloom. We at least stopped this landing party. That might warn them off. Arya considered the battered crates. Let's take what we can. Burn the rest so they can't reclaim it, then we go. The men got to work. 2 or 3 rummaged for anything useful. Coins, weapons, sealed jars of pungent oil, rough cloth. Others dragged the wounded raiders. The dead they left where they lay or tossed into the surf, too many to bury in the midst of a raging storm. Lightning forked across the sky, and Arya felt the electricity coursing through her veins. In moments like this, she understood the raw power that the stormlands embodied. Their journey back was grueling. The trail up the cliff was even more dangerous in the downpour, and they had to carry prisoners, some half lucid from pain. Several times, Arya slipped on the muddy path, catching herself with a hand against wet stone. Gendry nearly lost his grip on the unconscious raider he was dragging. By the time they reached the top, all of them were soaked, covered in mud and exhausted. They remounted and rode hard, though the wind whipped the rain into their faces. The night was fully upon them, darkness broken only by flickers of lightning. At last, Storm's End's torches came into view, and the gates opened to admit them. Stable hands rushed to take the horses, gasping at the sight of blood-streaked riders. Arya shivered, feeling the wet clothes cling to her skin. Gendry scowled, helping dismount the prisoners who still clung to life. The guards hustled them toward the dungeon. Once more, the castle halls were filled with the echoes of a fight won at great cost. In the days that followed, they learned only bits and pieces from the captured sellswords. Some died of wounds, others refused to speak, but 1 or 2 let slip that they had been hired by wealthy factions, names unknown, but the money was good, and the plan involved raids along the stormlands and reach coastlines to sow chaos. Possibly the ultimate goal was to undermine the crown, or force Gendry and other lords to spread their forces thin. Arya and Gendry traded grim looks upon hearing it. This was bigger than just random raids. Letters flew between Storm's End, King's Landing, and Winterfell. Sansa warned that if sellswords had infiltrated Westeros with the backing of certain lords, the realm risked another series of local rebellions. Gendry pressed the crown for more information or support. The crown's reply was tepid, merely acknowledging the threat and thanking him for containing it. That told Arya enough. King's Landing was either too preoccupied or too unsure of its own authority to intervene decisively. But Storm's End stood firm. Over the next months, Gendry directed the strengthening of the coastal watch, forging alliances with smaller houses on Tarth and along the Cape. Arya rode out often with scouting parties, ensuring that no raider or sellsword party could land unnoticed. The seas remained turbulent, and storms battered the coastline, yet they saw fewer suspicious sails. Perhaps the word had spread that Storm's End was no easy target. Meanwhile, the demands of everyday governance continued. Harvest planning, boundary disputes, repairing the fortress's aging sections. Arya found herself learning more about the local economy than she ever cared to know, ensuring that fishermen had supplies and farmers had markets. Gendry oversaw improvements to the stables, the smithy, even the old granaries. Day by day, they knit the stormlands tighter under their rule. The people began to speak of Lord Gendry and Lady Arya with a mixture of respect and awe, tales spreading of how the lady could wield a blade as well as any knight, and how the lord had bested sellswords on a stormy shore. One quiet evening, they sat in the solar, a small fire crackling in the hearth. The day had been windy but clear, a blessed respite from the rains. Arya reclined in a chair, sipping mulled wine as she gazed into the flames. Gendry sat opposite, flipping through a ledger. Outside, the wind whispered around the towers. "We haven't heard from King's Landing in a while," Arya remarked softly. "No new demands." Gendry grunted. "Which might mean they have their own troubles. Maybe word of these raids forced them to deal with rebellious lords. Or they're ignoring it and hoping the problem will vanish." He set the ledger aside, rubbing his eyes. "I'm tired, Arya." She gave a rueful smile. "You've done a lot these past months. Rest if you can." He snorted. "Rest? We're forging a realm here, or at least a corner of it." Arya set her wine down and stood, moving to stand behind him. She placed her hands on his shoulders and massaged gently, feeling the tension knotted in his muscles. He sighed, leaning back into her touch. For a time, they said nothing, letting the crackle of the fire and the hush of the wind fill the space. Eventually he murmured, "You know, we haven't had a real celebration since our wedding." Perhaps we should arrange something. Let the people feast. See that we're not just about taxes and war. Arya's lips quirked. A feast? That sounds like something Sansa would do. Are you sure? He chuckled. I'm sure. A small one, anyway. We could invite the local lords. Let the small folk come inside the courtyard for a day of merriment. Show them we appreciate their loyalty. Loyalty. She considered it. It might be good for morale. And you're right, we haven't had a proper chance to celebrate the end of the bandit troubles, or driving off the sellswords. All right, let's do it. That set a new flurry of preparation in motion. The castle kitchens bustled with activity as the word spread, a feast in a fortnight. The courtyard would be open to common folk for contests of archery and feats of strength, with small prizes. Gendry oversaw the arrangement of barrels of ale, casks of wine, and wagons of produce from nearby villages. Arya found herself cornered by the steward, who insisted she choose suitable decorations. She waved off most of it, not caring for frills, but allowed a few flower garlands and banners. When the day arrived, Storm's End buzzed with excitement. The sky dawned clear for once, a gentle breeze drifting off the sea. People from surrounding villages and even travelers from further out gathered in the courtyard. Trestle tables were set with bread, cheese, roasted meats, and pitchers of ale. Musicians tuned their lutes, flutes, and drums in a corner. Children ran about, wide-eyed at the castle's towering walls. Arya stood on a balcony overlooking the courtyard, wearing a simple dark dress, one of the few she owned, combined with a leather belt so that she could still keep a dagger at her hip. She gazed down at the throng, hearing laughter and chatter. A slight smile crossed her lips. She spotted Gendry moving through the crowd, clapping a fisherman on the shoulder, exchanging a grin with a village elder. It suited him better than the haughty airs of some lords. He was at home with these people, as if a part of him remembered the rough honesty of the forge. She descended into the courtyard, soon surrounded by curious onlookers who bowed or curtsied. Arya stiffened, still unaccustomed to such displays, but she managed polite nods. She engaged in a few snippets of small talk, though her answers were direct and brief. She sensed that despite her best efforts, rumors painted her as a fierce, sometimes intimidating figure. It might have been her habit of wearing breeches or carrying needle. But, she reasoned, better to be respected than pitied. Archery contests began near the far wall. Arya drifted over, watching with interest as men, and a few bold women, took turns firing arrows at straw targets. Some proved remarkably skilled, striking the bullseye with ease. Others missed badly, prompting laughter from the crowd. Gendry joined her partway through, and they found themselves cheering a small girl who managed to hit the target dead center on her first shot. The crowd roared with approval. Coins changed hands in wagers. The girl blushed fiercely, but Arya winked at her, recalling her own passion for archery as a child. Elsewhere, men tested their strength in mock wrestling matches or tried to lift heavy stones. A juggler performed near the main steps entertaining children. The mood was celebratory, an undercurrent of relief that for all the realm's problems, life could still be enjoyed. As dusk approached, the great hall filled with music. Tables were laden with food, torches casting dancing light. Gendry sat at the high table, Arya at his side along with a handful of local lords, small men of the stormlands, some older, some newly raised. They toasted the forging of peace, the driving away of bandits and sellswords, and the unity of these lands under House Baratheon. Arya drank sparingly, not wanting to dull her senses. Gendry indulged a bit more, but he kept his composure. After the meal, a few dances began. The music was lively, pipes and drums echoing off the vaulted ceiling. People whirled in pairs or groups, peasants and nobles mingling in a rare display of camaraderie. Arya watched from the edge, recalling the last time she had danced under a roof, probably at the Eyrie gathering. She still felt awkward in such moments, but she also recognized the genuine joy on the dancers' faces. Gendry approached, holding out a hand. "Care to dance, my lady?" She cocked her head, smirking. "You remember what happened last time? I stepped on your toes." He laughed. "I'll take the risk." Then, more gently, "Come on. It's a celebration." With a small sigh, she let him lead her onto the floor. The music swelled, and they found a place among the swirling couples. Arya placed her hands on Gendry's shoulders, feeling the warmth of his body through his tunic. He held her lightly around the waist. They moved to the beat, clumsy at first, stepping on each other's feet, then finding a semblance of rhythm. The crowd's laughter mingled with the music, torches flickering in every corner. She looked up into his eyes, seeing the reflection of the torchlight. "You're not half bad," she teased. He grinned, guiding her in a small turn. "I'd rather be swinging a hammer, but this'll do." They danced a while longer, a relaxed, almost carefree feeling settling over them. Arya allowed herself to enjoy the moment, forgetting the weight of future battles or the memory of past wounds. People clapped along with the music, and a jester tumbled nearby, drawing giggles from children. For once, the hall felt full of life, a place of warmth rather than grim business. Eventually, the music shifted to a slower tune, and the pair left the dance floor, returning to the high table for a drink. Gendry took a deep draught of ale, cheeks flushed. Arya sipped water, watching the dancers continue. A contentment stirred in her chest, unexpected but not unwelcome. When the feast wound down, commoners were escorted out to the courtyard, where they'd camp for the night or wander back to their villages. The lords took their leave, some weaving slightly from too much wine. The hall quieted, and servants began clearing tables. Arya and Gendry lingered by the hearth, letting the warmth soak in. He turned to her, eyes soft. "This was a good night," he murmured. "They needed it. We needed it." Arya nodded, voice low. "I didn't realize how much until now." They walked together through the corridors, heading to their chambers. The flicker of torches cast long shadows on the walls. At times, thunder rumbled faintly outside, though no storm had yet broken. Arya felt a comfortable ache in her feet from dancing, a reminder that life wasn't all about steel and blood. Gendry's arms slipped around her waist, and she let herself lean into him. In the privacy of their room, they shed the trappings of the day, her dress, his doublet, and found solace in each other's arms. Outside, the wind rose, rattling the window shutters, but inside, they created their own sense of calm. Arya recalled the traveling days, the nights of fear, hunger, and hiding. Now, she had a bed and warmth, and a man who loved her. It was a strange feeling, but not unwelcome. Over the coming weeks, the tension in the realm continued to simmer, but no large-scale conflict erupted. A few more suspicious ships were sighted, yet none dared land in force near Storm's End again. Some drifted south, possibly testing the coasts of Dorne or the Reach. Gendry communicated what he knew to the crown, receiving polite if distant gratitude. One cold morning, a raven brought a letter from Winterfell. Sansa wrote that the north was quiet, though rumors persisted of unrest in the Riverlands, bannermen loyal to old lords who refused to bow to King Bran's peace. She mentioned that Jon had sent word from beyond the wall, describing a peaceful life among the free folk. Arya felt a pang at the mention of Jon, remembering how she'd once yearned to see him again. Perhaps one day she would. For now, her place was here. A year passed. They settled into an unspoken routine. Every so often, a new challenge would arise. Raiders, disputes, or tidings from King's Landing, but each time, they faced it together. Gendry's confidence as a lord grew, tempered by Arya's fierce sense of justice. The small folk came to trust them. The local lords slowly acknowledged Gendry's authority and Arya's unconventional style. The scars of war were still present, but Storm's End endured, forging ahead through each new tempest. In quiet moments, Arya would stroll the battlements, letting the sea wind tangle her hair. She'd recall the child she'd been, eager to escape the confines of ladyhood, to brandish a sword and see the world. Now, she was a lady in name, but still held a sword in hand. She'd found a balance, fragile but hers. Sometimes, Gendry joined her on those high walls, gazing over the vast waters. She'd lean against him, and they'd talk of the future, of children perhaps, of forging alliances that might outlast the next wave of strife. Each conversation held the same undercurrent of determination. They would not be broken by the storms of life, literal or figurative. If word reached them that more mercenaries lurked out at sea, they prepared. If a letter came from Sansa asking for help with a northern matter, they considered how best to offer it. They discovered that ruling was less about personal glory and more about tending a fragile garden of people's needs, protecting them from the weeds of chaos. And in that tending, They grew themselves. As the second winter since their wedding approached, the stormlands saw more rain than snow, but the skies remained dark and cold. One blustery afternoon, Arya walked along the shore beneath the castle's cliff. A small cove was revealed at low tide, strewn with seaweed and driftwood. She stooped to pick up a smooth stone and flung it over the water, watching it skip twice before sinking. The wind tugged at her cloak, biting through the wool. She breathed in the tang of salt, listening to the distant roll of waves. Gendry approached, leaving footprints in the wet sand. He was bundled in a heavier cloak, face ruddy from the chill. Escaping the castle again? She shrugged, tossing another stone. Needed air. A break from ledgers and talk of supply routes. Nay. He joined her at the water's edge, stooping to pick up a rock of his own. He aimed for a ripple on the surface, but the stone plopped in with barely a skip, making him scowl. Arya smirked. I guess hammer throwing doesn't translate to skipping stones, he grumbled good-naturedly. She laughed, the sound caught by the wind. At least you can hold your own in a fight. They stood side by side, silence settling. Gendry stared out at the sea. Sometimes I think about the day we met on the road. I had no idea who you were, just some scrappy girl with a sharp tongue. And you had no idea I was King Robert's bastard. Now. Arya gave a nostalgic smile, remembering those dusty miles with Yoren, Hot Pie, Gendry, all of them running from something or someone. We've come a long way. He turned to her, eyes solemn. I'm grateful for every step that brought us here. She reached out and squeezed his hand, the chill sea wind buffeting them. Me too. Then she took a breath, letting her gaze roam across the horizon. Still, there's more road ahead. We might face bigger storms. Who knows what the crown will do, or if the Sellswords will return. But as long as we face it together, I'm not afraid. No, Yell. He nodded, slipping an arm around her waist. Then neither am I. They lingered there, watching the tide slowly creep in, washing over the stones where they stood. The castle loomed behind them, unyielding and steadfast. Arya felt the tug of that fortress. Its ancient walls had withstood centuries of storms, and now, in a way, so had she. She leaned her head against Gendry's shoulder, letting the sea's roar fill her ears. Yes, the path would twist again. Wars might come, kings might fall, ravens would bring tidings of gloom and hope alike. But in this moment she stood on a shore she had chosen, with a man who shared her fierce heart. She remembered once telling him she could be his family if he asked. Now they were a family, imperfect, scarred by the past, but unbreakably bound by all they had endured. And so Arya Stark, Lady of Storm's End, faced the horizon with clear eyes. 1,000 storms might break, but she would keep forging ahead. She was a wolf of the north, a lady of the stormlands, a survivor of endless nights, and a dancer at heart. The wind carried the taste of salt and promise, and in that promise, she found the assurance that she could shape her fate, just as she shaped the point of her blade. As they turned back toward the castle, the gulls wheeled overhead, and the tide surged up to claim their footprints. The future stretched before them like the open sea, deep, vast, and brimming with possibility. Whatever came, they would answer it together, side by side, forging not just a blade or a name, but a life strong enough to weather any storm.